My name is Iftach Govrin, and you will hear my co-host Itamar Zadov in the interview. Our guest today is Marin Spivack. Marin is a practitioner, teacher, and 20th generation lineage holder in Chen family Taijiquan, based in the Boston area, preserving and developing this system. The idea to interview Marin came to us through Ofek, a listener of our podcast, who is also an Israeli practitioner of Tai Chi Chuan and a student of Marin. Ofek had arranged Marin to come to Israel for teaching an intensive seminar of Tai Chi Chuan between 16th and 19th of May. Details on the seminar and other sites to find out more about Marin are in the show notes. So hello Marin, how are you?
Oh, hello. I'm fine. I hope you guys are well over there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So again, first of all, thank you for this interview. If we can just start, if you could explain in a few words what in Israel we're more used to the term Tai Chi, and if you can explain a little bit of Tai Chi Chuan and especially the Chen school that you're practicing, what is maybe its specialties or what's the difference from other schools, it would be great.
Okay, so in Chinese it's called Taijiquan. Okay, it's been sort of converted to the English pronunciation, and people are very familiar with it being called Tai Chi, and that actually, in at least in English, that can produce a fair amount of confusion.
Yeah, here as well.
There's a lot of fascination with this idea of what they call qi in Chinese martial arts and in Chinese medicine, which means essentially, sort of like energy or inherent universal energy. And people often think that the word Tai Chi refers to that energy. Well, it doesn't. The word in Chinese Taiji actually refers to like a sort of a polar relationship, meaning the relationship between what they call yin and yang, which is the feminine receptive energy, dark, as opposed to the sort of masculine advancing, a bright type of energy. These are the two polar opposites of sort of universal energy according to Chinese cosmology. This is a concept in a very ancient Chinese philosophy and cosmology, and the concept itself is just called Taiji, which refers to that, like everybody, almost so many of the Asian martial arts use this diagram that we see that has the white fish and the black fish chasing each other in a circle, right? Mm-hmm. And the white fish has a black eye and the black fish has a white eye, and they're chasing each other. And that, in Chinese, that diagram is called the Taiji Tu, which means just the Taiji diagram, okay? Which is basically just illustrating the flux, the relationship, the dynamic between those two opposing energies and how they are constantly chasing each other, and sort of the conflict and the harmony between those two opposite type of energies. So what they call Taiji Chuan is just essentially, Chuan just means fist, okay? Like
in Japanese it's Ken for many martial arts.
Right, yeah. Ken. Right. So Chuan just means fist. It just refers to a fist system. Okay. Mm-hmm. So Taiji Chuan just means the Taiji dynamic, the Taiji concept fist. Okay. Whether or not that was its original name, there's some debate about that. As far as the different styles of Taiji, there's in terms of scholarly recorded history, we know that Chen is the oldest, and all the other branches originated from Chen, from the Chen family. How exactly it was created, there's also some debate on that. But the Chen family were practitioners of a number of different martial arts before the assembly of Taiji Chuan. One of them was Shaolin, I think it was Shaolin Red Fist. They had another one that's called Tongbei Chuan, a certain type of, I think, Hongdong Tongbei. Tongbei is another Chinese martial arts, which the name kind of roughly translates to sort of through the back fist, like you're using your back, for power. There's a number of different ancestor arts the Chen family practiced. And then at some point along the line, you have the famous figure named Chen Wangting. And Chen Wangting was some kind of a military official. Some say he was a general. I mean, I don't know I'm not a historian, so that's not really my specialty, but this is kind of commonly known information that he was a military official of some notoriety and had participated or fought in a number of campaigns for that particular dynasty at the time, and then politics went unfavorably for him and that dynasty, and then he was basically laid off. He was out of work. He was no longer a soldier. He returned to his farming village with a lot of martial arts skill and experience, and he was old, and basically he was put to pasture. There was nothing for him to do. It was like an old workhorse, and they said, no need for you anymore. Go back to your farming village. He went back to his village, and as he was old, life was probably kind of boring there compared to being an official in the imperial army. And so as he says in these old sort of poetic writings, that he spent his time teaching the young people martial art, boxing routines. When the harvest was done, he spent his time teaching, creating boxing routines for the young people to help them become better members of society and lions and tigers at will. Okay, that's sort of when it first starts, when Chen Wangting is, there's also some scholarly history out there about him being part of a sworn brotherhood that were members of a certain temple near to Chen village in that area of China that practiced some kind of spiritual disciplines and qigong, energy practices and martial arts. And him and some of his sworn brothers kind of developed this Taiji fist, and then went on to practice it and teach it. It just so happens that Chen village and the Chen family were the only sort of historically, they kept it historically intact. And he went back to his village. Who knows where his sworn brothers went to? We don't have much of a record on that. He went back to his village and created these boxing routines, maybe based on what he had created in that temple, if the history is correct, and passed it down to his family. And that was including a lot of what we call the push hands regimen and all that type of stuff. And then they kept it in the family and continued to develop it over hundreds of years. I think it was something like 400 years or whatever it is. And, then over time, eventually there was the famous student named Yang Luchan, and who was sort of an indentured servant of the Chen family and was sneaking a peek at other people practicing, wanted to learn boxing and was not allowed to because he was not, his name wasn't Chen, but he sort of was sneaking and watching, and then he was caught. And, they probably would have killed him, because he, got a peek at the secret art. And someone said, hey, let's take a look at him practicing. Let's see what he was able to steal, and someone said, well, he's, not too bad. He's a smart guy. He picked up a little bit. Let's, maybe we'll spare his life and we'll teach him. And they did. And later he started what they call Yang style Taijiquan. And Yang style Taijiquan is basically, I think, the most popular, especially in the past, 20, 30 years. That's what we think of when people think of quote unquote Tai Chi. They're mostly thinking of Yang style and what you see in the park, done by old ladies, old Chinese ladies doing slow movements in the park. Most of it is going to be Yang style, which is, very soft, sort of upright practice that's mainly geared for health. Not a lot of martial content. And of course, there's some more traditional Yang style practitioners out there that still have some martial curriculum, but the vast, popular understanding of Taiji is usually Yang style, and it's kind of a health practice. The original Yang style was also a martial art, and there's other styles that have branched off of that, like Wu style and Sun style and other styles. But they all go back to Chen. That's as far back as any history really goes. And the general idea is why they named it Taiji, or somebody named it Taiji, is relating to that relationship between yin and yang and positive and negative forces. And that's sort of, we'll say that's at least, it's not only, but at least a double-faceted idea for Taijiquan. And one facet being that within one's own body, within the body of the practitioner, we are trying to harness that relationship between yin and yang. And they say that yin is the mother of yang. So the feminine receptive is the mother power, okay? And yang being the sort of hard power, or yin is often sort of equated with soft and yang is equated with hard, that they say the hard comes from the soft. So yin being the mother of yang, you harness the soft and relaxing, flowing, and receptive power to create a very strong hard power from that and in combination with that. And then on the other side, the other aspect is in relation to the opponent, not so different from what we know as judo, because judo in Chinese is called Rou Dao, which means the soft way. Okay, judo, although it's in some ways a very rigorous art and there's a lot of strength involved, I'm not experienced in judo, but I think the idea is that they are also trying to use the opponent's actions and strengths against them, to their advantage. And so Taiji, in relating to the opponent, also works that way, that besides harnessing the relationship between positive and negative forces in one's own body, in relation to the opponent, you're also trying to use the opponent's force to become your force. So they have the concept of never directly opposing strength and force. So if your opponent has a very strong action, you're trying not to block that action and not to go against that action, and basically trying to avoid struggle, right? Head-on force, head-on resistance. So if your opponent is giving you force, you're going to try and find a way to yield or join with that force and then cycle it through your own body and give it back to them as essentially the opposing force. Or, if one side is giving you a lot of power, you would maybe loosen that side, relax that side, and then attack the other side with a hard power. So one side becomes soft, the other side becomes hard. And it can work, quite a bit more complicatedly than that, but that's a general idea. And in terms of, myself, I've been studying Chen Taijiquan since around the age of 25. So that's, 22 or 23 years. And I got lucky with the teachers that I started with. And it just so happened the person that I started with was teaching a particular style or lineage of Chen Taijiquan, and I really didn't know what Chen Taijiquan was at the time, but I was able, through social relationships and hard work, to remain in that style or lineage of Chen throughout most of my training career. And although I did move through several different teachers, some passed away, I'm still in that similar style, and that has its unique certainly has its unique qualities, but that's probably for the next question, right? I mean, it could get pretty long if I keep going.
Well, if we're talking about the Chen style, so just to let our listeners know, as far as I understand, you're an official 20th generation of Chen Tai Chi style, right?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
So I would like to hear the story, and I'm sure our listeners would like to, how a Westerner like you got to get adopted into the Chen family, so to speak.
Well, okay, so it's a long story, and I'll tell some things here. And basically, my first teacher was named Chen Jinghong, or in the U.S. he was known as Jin Chen, and he was a long-term practitioner of Chen Taijiquan. And before Chen Taijiquan, he had also gotten to a sort of master level of what they call Zhuga Tanglang Quan, which is Zhu family. It's really Zhu family Kung Fu, but Kung Fu, like they say Kung Fu, right? That's just Mandarin Kung Fu, okay? Zhu family Kung Fu. And sort of after the fact, that was named Tanglang Quan, which means praying mantis fist, okay? And that's what's known in China as Southern Mantis, okay? So he was originally trained that style. I grew up in Hong Kong and trained that style. And then later, there was, I think his family had someone who worked for his family, maybe a bodyguard or something, early on back in Shanghai, had known Chen Taijiquan. And so he was exposed to it and was always interested. And so he did Southern Mantis. And then later, when he was older, he went back and searched out Chen Taijiquan and was able to learn from somebody very famous at the time whose name was Feng Zhiqiang. And Feng Zhiqiang was a disciple of one of the most famous recent masters of Chen Taijiquan, whose name was Chen Ke. And Chen Ke was the guy who in 1928 basically brought Chen Taijiquan out of Chen Village, which was closed and private, and they never taught anybody. Brought it out of Chen Village, and he moved to Beijing in 1928 and started teaching the public. And he became very famous and was known to be very fierce, very good. And so Jean Chen went and learned from his disciple named Fen Zhiqiang. And then, Jean was living in the U.S. I met Jean really by accident, just hunting around for Taiji to start. I had been interested to do martial arts for a long time, and I just finally took the step for a number of reasons. Some of them being just health reasons. I was a musician, have been forever, and if you play musical instruments, I mean, your body gets quite messed up, postural problems and everything, and I just needed exercise, and I was interested in martial arts, but I was not experienced, and I found him sort of by accident and by luck. I trained with him for 6 or 7 years, and at a certain point, I was going to take, that's when I also started going back to university and was so interested in Taiji that I started studying Chinese. And
I know this story.
Yes, and I was young and slightly stupid, and maybe now I'm just sort of older and slightly stupid. But I had this idea that if I'm gonna go learn Chinese, and then I'll be able to read all these old books, right? Read all these old Taiji books and Kung Fu books. I'll be able to understand everything. Of course, I did learn a fair amount of Chinese, but my reading was never good enough. I didn't take it far enough to read those books, which a lot of them were sort of in what they call Guwen, classical Chinese, too old and too complicated. And also, the worst part was that although I did do Asian studies and I loved the language, speaking Chinese, I was more interested in martial arts than scholarly pursuits. and although I did enough to graduate in my major, I didn't focus enough on writing and reading in Chinese well enough that I would be good enough to read those books and all that. But it did serve me very well because after I'd been studying Chinese for maybe a year and a half or so, I can't remember, I decided I was going to take a trip to China just because I'd never been. And I was like, this would be great. I want to, practice my Chinese and see if I can get better and see how my Chinese works. I mean, that's always fun. If you know a language, you can go to that country and then work on it, right?
Yeah.
So I at that time I told my teacher Jean Chen that I was going to go to China, and was there anybody I should see over there? And I didn't really expect him to say anything because he was kind of reserved as a person. But he did actually give me a formal introduction to his shifu, his teacher, Fen Zhiqiang. And Fen Zhiqiang was still alive at that time, and that was just very lucky. It was fortuitous, and I went to Beijing and practiced my Chinese and went and visited Fen Zhiqiang. And at that time, Jean basically told me, look, okay, go see Fen Zhiqiang, and you can talk to him because I think he had a letter and some messages. He wanted some contact with Fen Zhiqiang as well. Jean was not in good health at that time, and I think he was missing his former life and his opportunities in China, and that was his shifu. So he sent me a package and a letter and all this stuff, and he wanted me to go see Fen Zhiqiang. So, and he said, you go see him. If he likes you, maybe you're lucky. He likes you. You get to take some pictures with him. The situation is a lot more complicated than this. There's always a lot of politics in martial arts. But I'm giving you the short version because we would be here, all week. But the short version is he gave me, this formal introduction, sent me to Fen Zhiqiang. I said, if he likes you, he'll take a picture with you. And then I went to see him, and Fen Zhiqiang talked to me and said, how is Jean doing? And I said, well, his health is not that great. And we were just talking, and then he looked at me and read the letter and looked at me and said, do you want to train? Do you want to learn? What could I say? I mean, I was speechless, and I said, well, of course, right? I mean, yes. And he said, okay, we start tomorrow. And so we did. And so I learned from him, and then I went back there on a number of visits, and I learned from him, and then returned and practiced with Jean as well. And that was over a number of years. And then at a certain point, Jean's health was not good. He passed away from cancer. And then I graduated university, and after I graduated university, that was it. I went to Beijing. I moved to Beijing, and then while I was over there, I studied with a few people. I studied with Fen Zhiqiang for a while. Then I studied a little bit of Baguazhang, someone named He Jianbao, and in the interim, and I was actually looking for Chen Yu, my shifu, because I had met him before, and I had been told about him, and through a number of strokes of luck, I actually found him in Beijing after a lot of work. and ended up, meeting him. When I first met him, we went out to dinner with me and his disciple and my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. And she was there either to help me with my with my Chinese language problems, because I wasn't perfect. I won't say, even now, I won't say I'm fluent, but I'm very proficient. I'm conversationally pretty good, and my accent is decent, and I can have fairly complex conversations, but not fluent. There's plenty of people a lot better than me. Most of them Chinese people, but there's a lot of there's foreigners who are a lot better than me too. But she was there to help me and maybe carry me home if I had to get too drunk. The result, of course, was that he got us both too drunk, and we had to carry each other home. That's the Chinese culture is like that, and you sort of drink to celebrate. And so we went out and we drank and we had a nice talk, and I asked him if he was willing to teach, and he said he was, and I started training with him the next week, and within a few weeks I did the formal way to sort of apply to become a disciple, or what they call 徒弟. And there's formal ways to do that, the same way the Chinese people would do that. The only difference is I wasn't Chinese, but in my case, I can say I was fortunate. But it was also hard work. My Chinese was good enough, and my background with Gene Chen, because Gene had lived in the United States for many years. So in some ways he was very modern. He was very sort of Americanized, but in his heart he was still very, very traditionally Chinese and very strict. And so intentionally, unintentionally, at least some of us who were in his class learned some of the Chinese cultural traditions around martial arts and just social things that you need to know to move in Chinese society. And I was lucky enough to learn some of those things from him. And then a number of other trips to China, I sort of learned more. By the time I started training with Chen Yu, I was good enough in the cultural side, and my Chinese language was good enough that I could sort of do the formal thing the same way Chinese people would do it. It's complicated, but it's like knowing how to talk to people in China, in Chinese culture, it's not simple. It's just not the same as the West at all. It's like, now I don't know how much you guys know about this, but being in Japanese martial arts, my grandfather was a great studier of Japanese culture. And I remember him telling me that in the Japanese language, they have essentially 64 different relationships, and therefore 64 different, they're not exactly dialects, but they're 64 different ways of speaking based on 64 different relationships. And it can even change the grammar and the sentence structure, and there's all kind of things you have to know. Maybe different words, maybe grammatical. I'm not an expert on Japanese, but I know that there's 64 different relationships. Depending on whether you're speaking to somebody who is older than you, or somebody who is younger than you, or somebody that's a work colleague, or somebody that you don't know, all kind of different ways of relating. And China doesn't have 64 different relationships, but maybe I don't know how many relationships they have, but they don't have a linguistic difference based on 64 different relationships, but they certainly have a pretty large number of relationship nuances that one ought to know. If you are speaking to somebody who is older than you, if you are speaking to somebody who is senior to you in martial arts, if you are speaking to a colleague, it's all kind of, and then there's all this, because China is a very hierarchical society. So, how do you, even if you're just a normal Chinese person, if you want to become the adopted apprentice or adopted son of some martial arts teacher, and that person is older than you, how do you relate to them? There's ways that you have to do that. And
could you give us an example?
Well, if you went to, for example, if you went to a very old teacher, let's say you're 20 years old, you're just a kid, okay, and you found a teacher who's like 75 or 80 years old and was very famous, and you found out where they lived, and you just went and banged on their door, and they opened up their door. And there's that person that you're thinking of, and they're 75 years old or whatever, and you're 20, you say, hello, I want to learn from you. I heard about you. You're famous. You're great. I want to learn from you. Even in China, they probably just slam the door in your face. And I saw this in action. I remember, when I was studying Bagua over there, I was at my teacher's house at the time, and I remember somebody just showed up out of nowhere, walked into the courtyard, and we were outside in the courtyard talking, practicing, whatever, but we were sort of taking a break, so there wasn't any martial arts to see at that moment. But he was standing near his doorway, and this person knew the address of his house somehow and walked right up to him and said, "Oh, are you He Zhenbao? I know who you are. You're He Zhenbao. You teach Baguazhang. I want to learn Baguazhang," right? And He Zhenbao just looked at him really quite incredulously, like surprised, and said, "Who? He Zhenbao? Who's that? Who are you looking for?" He said, "He Zhenbao, the Baguazhang guy, right?" He said, "Oh, I don't know who that is. Who's that? Who are you looking for?" No, I want to learn Bagua from this guy He Zhenbao. So I don't know who that. You must have the wrong address." The guy looked very confused, turned around, and left. End of story.
Wow.
And
that's harsh.
Well, that's just a story. It's like in the United States, and this comes out of the African American community in the United States. They have a saying that says "come correct." Means you have to come correct, which means if you approach a situation and you come up to somebody without any respect, it's like you didn't come correct. Get out of here. You got to come with the right attitude. And this guy didn't come correct. He came up to the doorway, walked right up to that person. He didn't introduce himself well. He wasn't particularly humble. He was too forward. And worse than that, he had no relationship with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nobody introduced him. He didn't know who this guy was, so he didn't have any reference for relating to this person. And in China, so there's a word in Chinese which, although it has a translation, it doesn't really have a parallel in English, and that word is guanxi. And whenever you read like economics or political articles about China, they're always going to talk about this word guanxi, like it's some mystical thing. And what it really means is relationship. Okay, but the way it's used is different. In English, we might use the word relationship. It's kind of simple. It's just face value. We understand what that means: a relationship between two things, relationship between people. But in Chinese, this word guanxi refers to a little bit more. So it's relationship, but it's also like relationship itself is it's a type of a currency that makes society work, because the traditional society is so hierarchical that nothing works without relationships and bribes, and this kind of thing. So relationship itself it refers to like a glue or a bond between people. It's the thing that makes you important to somebody else for whatever reason. And if so, for example, when Jean Chen sent me to Fengzhichang with a letter and a gift and the whole thing. Okay, Jean Chen is Fengzhichang's disciple. He has guanxi with Fengzhichang, a pretty strong, type of guanxi. Okay, he has this relationship bond. They spent some years together. Okay, so they have this really solid bond. And then he sends me with a letter and a gift, giving me a formal introduction to Fengzhichang. Now I have guanxi with Fengzhichang. Okay, because somebody that's important to him paved the way for me and said this person is important. You can take them seriously, all right? And so he established that link now between him and me, and therefore me and Fengzhichang. So Fengzhichang was able to take me seriously. Otherwise, he would have looked at me and said, "Who are you? Get out of here!" And truth be told, I mean that's the way China is. I mean it is a quote unquote communist country. Now, how communist is it? That is up for debate. But for years, it was strongly communist, right? And as a result, I mean, they went through some years of hard living over there, and people generally, Chinese people, they kind of keep to themselves. I mean, they don't like to talk to strangers. If they don't know you, they got nothing to do with you, because you could mean problems for them.
And your relationship with the teacher you made in Beijing paved the way to the other teachers, if I understand correctly.
That was a little bit different. So Jean paved the way for my relationship with Fengzhichang, okay? And then Fengzhichang didn't pave the way for me to anybody else. It was, in fact, like I spent some time studying Bagua there. It was a fairly short time, but it was a good time. And I was introduced to the Baguazhang teacher by a friend of mine who was studying with that teacher. So the friend, I was like, let's go to. He was going to go. I was going to go. Let's go together to China. We stayed together, and then he was, going to go train with his teacher. And then I was doing other things. And then he said to me, "Hey, do you want to come along? You could translate for me because his Chinese wasn't good." And at that moment, I didn't have anything to do, and I said, "Fine, that sounds like fun, right?" So I wasn't interested in Baguazhang. I wasn't trying to learn Baguazhang. I just went to help out and to have a fun day and meet somebody interesting. So I went along with him, and when I went to meet my Bagua teacher, he looked at me, "So who are you?" And I said, I'm here. I'm going to translate for him. He knew my friend. He remembered him. He's like, oh, how you doing? And then I said, I'm, so and so. I'm his friend. I'm just going to come help him translate and hang out. He goes, really? You're just going to translate? I said, yeah. He goes, why don't you train some Baguazhang? I said, well, I do Taiji Chuan. He said, that's okay. He said, Baguazhang will help your Taiji Chuan. He wanted me to train Baguazhang at the time. So I was like, okay, somebody's just offering to teach me. Why not, right? I mean, he liked me enough and said, sure, you should learn this. Why not? And he was, he's incredibly good, shockingly good, very good. So I was like, fine, sure, why not? So I trained a little. I translated for my friend. We had a good time, and so in that sense, my friend gave me guanxi with him. Sort of paved the way. The fact that I was linked at least to the person who knew him. Otherwise, would he have taught me? I mean, I don't know. That was a different time. Of course, that teacher, the Baguazhang teacher, is quite a bit more famous now. He probably teaches lots of people. But back then, maybe times were different. And so later on with Chen Yu, I didn't have any guanxi with Chen Yu at that time. That's my shifu who I ended up training with. But I met him sort of by accident. And then later when I got to talking with him, I mean, here's the funny part is that Jean Chen, my first teacher, so how to explain this? Jean Chen, my first teacher, had spent a fair amount of time in Chen Village back in the day before Chen Village was open. It was politically a closed zone, meaning at that time, this is really just after the Cultural Revolution, and the government had a tight grip on who could go where. And Chen Village was like a farming co-op, right? Sort of like what you guys have kibbutz over there, right?
Yeah.
It was sort of like a farming co-op, but it was closed by the government for political reasons. So no one who wasn't part of that family or part of that work unit was allowed to go in there. And it was very controlled. Back in those days, Jean Chen, actually through a friend of his, who is a very famous Chen Taijiquan master named Chen Xiaowang. I mean, he teaches all over the world. But back then, Chen Xiaowang was not famous at all. He was, as Jean put it, he was a country bumpkin. He was, a farming sort of a peasant, who was good at kung fu, but he was very young. And they became friends. And as I heard it, Chen Xiaowang helped Jean Chen, who was called Chen Jinghong, helped him forge fake papers that stated he was a member of the Chen family, which allowed him to get into Chen Village.
Wow.
And so he got into Chen Village and he trained quite a bit there. And then somewhere later, he wanted to go learn from someone named Chen Zhaokui, who is my teacher's father. Okay, Chen Zhaokui is very famous for bringing his father's kung fu back to Chen Village when the art was kind of dying out. But in any case, Jean wanted to go learn from Chen Zhaokui, and he later went out to, I think he went out to dinner with him in Beijing. And when he did that, Chen Zhaokui brought along Fen Zhiqiang, okay, became his shifu, right? The one he introduced me to. And so Jean is out to dinner with Chen Zhaokui and Fen Zhiqiang. And Chen Zhaokui said, you should learn from Fen Zhiqiang. And I think most likely Chen Zhaokui was probably very busy. And we also know that at the end of his life, his health was not so great. So he probably said, I'm not, he's probably not doing that great, and let Fen Zhiqiang do the hard work, of teaching you. And so he introduced him to Fen Zhiqiang. And so he had guanxi with Fen Zhiqiang. Do you understand? He had at least had some kind of formal introduction. So, and somewhere, I don't know the exact sequence of events, but he had spent a lot of time in Chen Village. He had been around Chen Zhaokui. He had met Chen Zhaokui obviously before, right? So that he could go out to dinner with him later. And Chen Zhaokui's son, whose name is Chen Yu, right, was always around. When my first teacher was learning from Chen Zhaokui, the kid was around, right? Chen Yu was, 6, 7 years old or whatever it was, running around getting into trouble. So my first teacher knew who Chen Yu was, but Chen Yu was a lot younger than him. See, when I trained from Jean, he was like 65 years old, right? And then when I went to China, eventually, after many trips to China and everything, when I was there learning from Chen Yu, he was 43 years old at the time.
Oh.
But it was older than me. I mean, I was like 30 or something. I can't remember, 28 or 30. So point being, although I didn't have a direct, connection to Chen Yu, my teacher had told me about him. So that when I met him the first time, I actually called him by the name, his childhood nickname, that my first teacher had told me was his name. My first teacher always called him by his childhood nickname because he always knew him as this little rascal who was running around. And so at that time they called him Xiao Pang, which means little fatty, like a little fat kid, like little baby, That's like a nickname they give to a little baby kid, who's kind of fat because they value, like a pudgy, healthy kid. So they always called him little fatty, and that's what my teacher called him. And so that when I met him in Beijing, I said, "Oh, you're Xiao Peng," which was like a really stupid thing for me to say, because it's like here I'm talking to a 40-something-year-old guy saying, "Hey, you're a little fatty," and which was, but I was at that time fairly inexperienced, and I'm like, "Oh, you're Xiao Peng," and he just looked at me like, God, it was his look was a cross between what an idiot you are, and then on the other side, like, how the heck do you know my nickname? That's my childhood nickname, and how is it that some idiot little foreigner here knows my childhood nickname? That's so odd,
that's
right?
Priceless.
Right,
Wow.
and then I said, well, I know who you are because my teacher knows you. And he said, "Who's your teacher?" I said, "It's Chen Dinghong." And and I told him some stories about Chen Dinghong, and they said, "Oh, I know who that guy is. I know who that guy is." Of course, he didn't like him all that much, but I know who he is. You study from that guy, I know that guy. And then he said, "Oh, show me a little of what you learned." I showed him a little. Of course, he kind of laughed at me. "You suck. You're terrible." But I showed him a little, and from there, we sort of have a basis for having a relationship. I knew, and then he also knew that I had studied from Feng Zhiqiang. Okay, so my teacher Shifu Feng Zhiqiang, I had studied from him, and Feng Zhiqiang and Chen Yu knew each other very well. Okay, so they had their own relationship, and the fact that I had been Feng Zhiqiang's student, well, then that was like Chen Yu was like, "Oh, you were Feng Zhiqiang's student. Well, you should come learn from me." You see, then there's a little bit of rivalry there, right?
Yeah.
And then the fact, there's a little bit of pride in that because Feng Zhiqiang was already very famous at this time, and this time Chen Yu was not famous. And so the fact that I was a foreigner who had learned from Feng Zhiqiang, and maybe he could get me to come learn from him, that's a badge of honor. At that time in China, because we're talking early 2000s here. At that time, having a foreign student was a badge of honor. And then additionally, the fact that that person had been a student of Feng Zhiqiang who's very famous, and now they would want to study with you, Chen Yu, well, that's a big point of pride, okay?
Okay, I want to ask a question that a lot of the time you use or the word disciple or student, or maybe in this interview and other. Could you maybe give a few words about the difference between a disciple and a student, and what is the responsibilities of a disciple or a teacher to his disciples, and maybe how many disciples each teacher can have? Or
Okay. So it's a good question because this is also a very misunderstood term, okay? And part of that comes from English. People talk about so-and-so is a disciple of a particular teacher. And what is the first thing that comes to mind in English? Well, Jesus and his disciples, right? People think it's some kind of religious or spiritual connotation. Well, of course, it is not. It's just that we don't have a good word for it. There's no really good translation for this idea of disciple. And so disciple isn't the right word. In Chinese, it's called 徒弟, okay? And really, if we pick a better translation, we would choose the word apprentice, okay? So if it was like the year 1850 and you wanted to learn to make furniture, cabinets, beds, all that kind of stuff. You wanted to become a woodworker and learn furniture making, which we call cabinetry over here in English. If you wanted to learn that, you're not just going to go to school for it. They didn't necessarily have a school for it. You're going to go 5 blocks away, and there's going to be some master cabinet maker who has a wood shop where they make furniture, and they're master. They know everything. And you're going to go to that person, and maybe your dad or your mom is going to bring you over there, and they're going to say, "Please accept my boy here as an apprentice. He wants to become an apprentice in woodworking," right? And maybe your family is poor, and they say, if we can get Master Yosef over there to take him as an apprentice in woodworking, then he'll have a good life, right? He'll build a trade, he'll be able to support himself and make money, and he'll do well, right? So back in the old days, this is called going into the trades here in the United States. And so you would become an apprentice to that master woodworker. And in the beginning, they would have you sweeping the shop floor, and they'd call you idiot, right? They say, oh, hey, get that stupid kid over here to clean up the mess. And you wouldn't learn anything. They'll put you to work because maybe even in this case, it's not a school. Your father's not paying them to teach you, right? They just said, please teach them. Well, what are they going to do? Well, you're going to become my apprentice. And that means you're going to do everything I tell you, right? You want to learn, you're going to learn the workings of the entire shop. And you'll start at the bottom. Clean the floors, clean the shop tables, take out the trash, clean the tools, sharpen the tools, all that kind of stuff. And then as the years go by, well, they start teaching you skills. You start working on things, and the master teaches you. And, maybe after 10 years, you're what they call a journeyman. In English, they would say journeyman, or a master-level woodworker. And you can open up your own shop, right? And then you could take on apprentices and teach them the trade, teach them the craft. That is probably the closest term that really relates to what it is. However, the paradigm of the disciple, quote-unquote disciple, or 徒弟, the paradigm is a bit different and maybe a bit further. Although I would wager that in the old days, even in the West, it went a bit further. But in China, the idea is, and this relates, I think, especially to the Chinese situation where, historical situation where in the past, I mean, the poverty was just unbelievable. If you were born in the countryside to maybe a farming family and things didn't go well, I mean, you just had nothing, and there's no social safety net. And if you're poor and no food and no trade, I mean, you die. It's like back in the past, and it even kind of persists into today with the sort of sexism that exists in China. I mean, if you were a family and if you had a lot of kids, if you had daughters, right, they favored sons because the sons would be like, that's muscle, that's work, right? Mm-hmm. And if you were a farming family and you had sons, well, those sons would go out and work the fields, but too many daughters, and that's going to be a burden for you because maybe those daughters get into trouble, and maybe they have babies, and how many babies you have in your family, you have to feed them all, right? So what they would do is they would try to marry those daughters off so somebody else would feed them, right? Because they just couldn't handle that many kids. They didn't have birth control or whatever. So they try to marry those daughters off. And it's kind of like that. If you have kids, if you're poor and you have kids and you can't feed them, what do? Right? I mean, you don't want them to die, but you can't feed them. So in some cases, you want them to have a good life and you can't feed them. You don't have the means to feed them. You're going to find a trade for them, whatever the trade is. In this case, it happens to be martial arts. Martial arts back then was a trade, right? You could be employed by it, but it was also important that you could protect yourself and your family with it. In some cases, it could help you go into the military or become a government official. Mm. But regardless, your mother or your father could take you to your local, Southern Mantis or, Taiji Kung Fu or whatever martial arts it was, master who lived in your village, right? Or even a family relative, right? If your own family does it. But if it wasn't in your own family, they could take you to that master and say, please take my child as an apprentice. And then the same things would apply as to the woodworking apprentice, except it goes further. So in this case, it's not just take my child as an apprentice. It's like, take my child. I can't feed my child. Take my child. This child now belongs to you. So that's the old style 2D, is they'd take the kid and give the kid to that person, whether it's martial arts or any other pursuit, because this idea of the 2D is not specific to martial arts. So I mean, I have a friend over there who's a doctor of Chinese medicine. When he was talking to me about his training time when he was young, that's what it was. I mean, his teacher was much older than him, and he became a 2D to that teacher, and basically the teacher just owned him. He was the son of the teacher. And that's in medicine. It's this exact same thing. So in Kung Fu, it's no different. So they would give you to somebody as basically a servant. And being that person's servant, you get to be their apprentice. You serve them for a number of years. They teach you. That's the trade, right? You act like their son. You take care of them. You take care of their family. You do everything they want you to do. And in return, over the years, they will treat you like a son. They will teach you their art, their special art, right? And when you are of age, when you are good enough, well, then you are a person who carries on their lineage, their specific art, and maybe you could teach it later. But so that's sort of the old, antiquated version. You'd be like a servant. You'd be a part of their family. It's a very close relationship and secretive even. So a 徒弟, what an apprentice would learn, I mean, the public would never see. Because many of these Chinese martial arts were sort of held by clans. They were not shared in public with the outside at all. Maybe the other 徒弟, the other apprentices of that teacher are your sworn Kung Fu brothers, where you all know a particular set of secret arts and you're sworn to never reveal it to anybody else. It's not uncommon at all.
In modern China, there's like a possibility, like if I can understand that you had a few teachers, and there's a situation, for example, that in one school you have people that are disciples or apprentices, and people just come to practice, or it's necessarily everybody has to be an apprentice or a...
So modern times is quite a bit different. Okay, some of the old history still exists, but of course it's very different. Many martial arts will be taught publicly now. Okay, so back in the day when we're talking about the history of the disciple-apprentice relationship, back in the old days, I mean, a lot of these martial arts weren't taught publicly at all. So Chen Taijiquan in the year, in the year like 1910, I mean, you would never have seen it. It would have been held by the family, and you would never have seen it outside the family. They wouldn't have taught it publicly at all. I mean, maybe in very rare cases you would. These days, Chen Taijiquan really didn't become really public until 1928, okay, when Chen Taijiquan took it to Beijing, and then he started teaching publicly. But even then, he had disciples and students, I think. Okay, I can't say that definitively. I know he had disciples, but he probably had students that were not disciples. That certainly is the way it is today. I would say that today, most in the world of Taijiquan, other arts I can't speak of specifically, but in Taijiquan, I would say most of it is public students now. It first went public really maybe 1928, and then semi-public through up to the 1950s, 1960s. You have these difficult political times, Cultural Revolution, and World War II, and starvation and all this kind of stuff. And then in the 60s and 70s, you have the Cultural Revolution, which basically made it like illegal to practice Kung Fu. It was sort of it was viewed as sort of feudal, right? One of these old things that the communists do not want. They don't want to go back to feudal China. They're trying to go to a new Marxist China that liberates everybody from, a class oppression, right? And they considered things like Taijiquan and Chinese opera and all these other old traditions to be things that should be done away with because they're politically incorrect. So it was, now people did practice it, but it was just generally like, you're at risk by being involved in it. You could be branded politically undesirable, and then you're going to have problems. But then sometime, whatever year it was, 1978 or 1980, I can't remember what year, Mao Zedong, the leader of China, is sick. And he, at least the story goes, I may be wrong on this, someone out there will tell me I'm an idiot for saying it, and they're probably right. Mao Zedong's health was not good, and he actually found, I believe, someone named Gu Luxing, who practiced a number of different styles of Taiji and had some government connections, and they brought Gu Luxing in to teach Mao Zedong Taiji because they thought this would be good for your health, to save dear leader's health, right? So they taught him some Taiji, and I guess Mao Zedong liked it, right? And then he came out in public and said, Taiji hao, Taiji's good, practicing Kung Fu's good, and then all of a sudden it was legal. And then everybody could practice Kung Fu, and then it started to have a resurgence. And then after the 1980s, it sort of became popular, and it was promoted by the government. And they started to have tournaments and performances and all this kind of stuff. And they had what we know as the Beijing Wushu team and all that, which is performance Wushu, sort of like the Olympics, And it had a big resurgence, and it became very public. And certain names within Chen Taijiquan, as well as other arts, became promoted by the government as sort of commercially viable enterprises. Okay, and now that's why we have like Shaolin Temple. Everybody knows about Shaolin Temple, right? And Wudang Temple, and these old antique temples that they have these sort of mystique around them as having had martial arts, and now they're touring the world with their martial artists / dancers, right? They're doing performances and all this kind of stuff with their extreme feats of strength and all this. And the truth is, most of those Shaolin monks and everything, they're not original, they're not monks at all, they're not Shaolin at all. Most of them are hired from Beijing Wushu University. Beijing Sports University teaches all this sports, performance, athletics, wushu, martial arts. which is like acrobatics and performance. And so they hire a bunch of these sort of professors or graduates from that program to come be the staff at Shaolin Temple and dress up as monks and, learn a couple sutras they can recite, and pose as monks. But they're not monks at all. That's why they have so much. There's a lot of scandal related to Shaolin, because the guys who aren't monks are getting into a lot of trouble. But it's a commercial enterprise. Shaolin became a commercial enterprise because the government realized, hey, the foreign tourists have a very big interest in Shaolin because of all the mythology and the stories. So if we can staff this with people, we can charge money, tickets, and make a lot of money. And they've been very successful. I mean, it has to be $1 billion. It's a huge industry. And so that's kind of like, the Chinese government realized that Chinese Kung Fu and Wushu is like, that's a cash cow. And they can make a lot of money with that. And they promoted certain teachers, and they had tournaments, and now you have these famous teachers who are touring the globe and giving workshops and all this kind of stuff. So as a result, there's a number of those teachers who have many, many students, thousands and thousands of students, hundreds of thousands of students the world over. Do they take disciples? Well, things have changed. So China, of course, after Deng Xiaoping, who's one of the leaders who sort of steered China towards its more a free market economy, and said, to get rich is glorious.
Yeah.
After he guided China in that direction, I mean, of course, the free market opened and everybody wants to get rich. And that includes Taiji teachers, any kind of Kung Fu teacher. I mean, the more students, the better, right? You get more people paying and you're making money and you have a nice car and there you go. Your wife's happy, right? So that's the truth. And so a lot of these teachers now, they'll take as many students as possible. And in some cases, they'll take a ton of public students, and then maybe they'll have, a few actual disciples who learn the real stuff, right? The public students are sort of like the tourists, the visitors, the people who don't really want to work that hard, but they'll do the performance stuff, the health stuff, the stuff that looks good and is fun. It's a fun activity to do with your friends. And then they'll have a few people who maybe become disciples and they want to learn actual martial arts stuff, right? But then, and this is more common, is you'll have teachers who'll teach just about anybody. They'll teach hundreds, thousands of public students with no problem, no requirements. And then they'll, in fact, take advantage of the situation and just take disciples, almost anybody, if you can pay the money. And so the discipleship has become more of a money game, especially for the very famous teachers. If the bigger your reputation is, well, the more money it costs to become a disciple, right? And the price is sort of going up and up and up. So, literally, some of these people, yeah, you can become my disciple, but, the cost for being a disciple is $10,000 or $20,000.
That's just sad.
Wow.
Right. And I mean, you have, in some cases, you have some of these teachers who travel in a motorcade of limousines in China. They travel in a motorcade of limousines. They have, 14 houses. They're billionaires or whatever it is. They can count among their disciples. Maybe they have some political officials that are their disciples. They have government connections, right? Maybe other ones, they'll have movie stars and entrepreneurs, people like Jack Ma, right? Who's the founder of Alibaba. I think he became disciple of one of these big name guys. Who knows how much he paid, right? Maybe you want to become a disciple of this teacher, you got to buy him a Mercedes.
Wow.
Or buy him a house. And so right now the situation is, in a lot of situations, it's like, yeah, you can become a disciple if you have the bucks to do it. And the thing is, why do people do this? Because in Chinese society, like I was talking about guanxi, politics, social leverage, okay, power in society is very much dependent on guanxi and what they call 地位, which means position, okay? So guanxi and 地位 are both very, very important. So relationship and position, meaning relationship, who are you networked to? Who are you connected with? Who do you know? Like in Hollywood here in the U.S., you want to be a movie star. Well, who do you know, right? And I mean, at the risk of being offensive, it used to be who do you know, who do you blow?
Oh.
Right? That's the truth, right? Now all of that stuff came out in the U.S. Now it's like, no, we don't do that anymore. Now it's just who you know. Well, we'll see how that goes. But it's like, who do you know in China? You want to get anywhere in business? Who do you know, right? And if you don't know me, if you're trying to make a deal with me, and you don't, you should know somebody that I know if you want to establish some guanxi with me. If you don't know anybody that I know, if we don't have any guanxi, you're going to have to give me something. You're going to have to pay me or give me a great gift or do something really great for me, bribe me somehow. Then we're going to have guanxi. Once you've established how important I am to you by giving me something or doing something for me, then we'll have some guanxi. And then maybe I'll care about you a little bit. You'll be a little bit important since you did something for me. It's, a game of favors, okay? So in the world of Kung Fu, it just so happens that, if you're super famous as a teacher of Taijiquan, you travel in a motorcade of limousines, and you have among your disciples government officials, you're an important person. And if I can be a disciple of you, I will, by extension, become important, right? And then it's like, if I'm a disciple of this person, that actually will affect how I do business. It doesn't even relate to martial arts, but it's like, if I want to go over here and do business, there's a connection between the network of martial arts and the network of business. If I'm a disciple of somebody very famous, well, now I have some social diwei. I have some social clout in business, okay? So people will take those discipleships for business. Maybe they can make money with Kung Fu, or not even with Kung Fu, just with the connection. That connection itself has power and leverage. So you'll have a lot of people who are just buying discipleships. And a lot of those teachers, that's fine, no problem. They'll just sell out because they're getting rich. And that's just the way the world is right now. So that's the sort of current situation. Now, that's not something I'm happy about, but that's just the way it is. However, that said, I'm going to finish answering your question here and say that the true traditional framework for being a disciple and the way that I did it doesn't work that way at all. Okay? So that basically you become a disciple of a teacher. Generally the way it works is, you have to give some money. You're sort of donating some money, which is that's your expressing to that teacher how valuable they are to you. Putting some money on the table saying, I'm willing to sacrifice this much because I so want to be your disciple and learn your art. So you're going to put some money on the table. You're going to, every teacher's going to be different, but you're going to do the equivalent of like taking some oaths, making some promises, right? It's like an honor system, but, normally, generally speaking, the tradition in China in the old days was that if you're a disciple of one person, that's it. You're a disciple for life. So if you become disciple of that person, you don't go study with somebody else. You're committing yourself to that person. You're becoming the adopted son of that person. You can't adopt a second, parent, right? It's like that. That's your one. What would that be? Guardian, right? Your, in English, godfather or whatever. Yeah. You're becoming the son of that person. You don't get to do that again. It's one time and it's forever. Okay, and then on top of that, you're going to do what they tell you to do. They tell you to jump off a cliff. You jump off a cliff. They tell you to practice until you can't walk. You practice until you can't walk. They tell you to, do this move 7,535 times. You do it 7,535 times until you have no skin left on your hands. That's the agreement, right? The agreement is that whatever they tell you to do, you do it. Mm-hmm. And then the implicit agreement, and also you'll serve them, whatever they want you to do for them, you'll do it, okay? They want to control your life, they'll do it, and you'll accept it. And then, and this is something for the English-speaking audience, for the Westerners, most people do not understand this. I can explain it right here to you, and they'll say, yeah, I understand, I get it, but they don't get it. In Chinese society, it's like, remember, we have a network of guanxi. So it's like, if you are my shifu, right, you're my master, you probably know my mom and dad, and you know other people that I know. And if I don't do well with you, the shame comes back to me through a roundabout route. Everybody knows it. You know what I mean? It's like there's no secrets. It's like you're in this network of the culture. Sure, things go wrong. It's not absolute. You can always run away, but it's like it's not so easy. You're not just gonna say no. I don't. Shifu told me to do this move 500 times, and you know what? I don't feel like it. No, it's not that easy. It doesn't work like that. And also it's China. Maybe Shifu told you to do this, and you said no. He just beats the crap out of you. Who knows where it goes? Everybody's different. So it's on one hand, you're serving them, you're doing everything they want. But there's also this agreement that's basically the simple equation. If you're my teacher and I'm just a student, okay, that means I can learn from you, and then I can go out into the world and I can demonstrate horrible kung fu. I can be terrible. All right, I'm just the most useless, horrible student. I go out there and say, look at my Kung Fu. And everybody looks and says, oh my God, that's the worst thing I've ever seen, okay? You're horrible. You suck. You're terrible. You go out there and you're just terrible. And then you, the teacher, you have the right to say, I didn't teach the guy. I don't even know him.
Wow.
He didn't learn from me. I don't know that guy. Not my problem, right? He's terrible. Not my fault. And the reverse of that is you're the teacher and I'm a student, just a normal student. And I go out there and I'm great. I show off my Kung Fu. I get into a fight. I kick someone's ass. And I'm the best thing that anybody's ever seen. I'm so good. I'm a genius, right? I learned from you for 10 years. And I'm so good. And I go out there and I kill everybody. I just take them all down. And everybody says, wow. Wow, sai nigga yo Kung Fu. Wow, that person has Kung Fu. He's incredible. Look how skilled he is. And say, who did you learn from? Say, I didn't learn from anybody. I created it myself.
Wow.
Right? I'm a genius. I just went up to the mountain. I meditated. I was visited by a cosmic praying mantis and a cosmic snake and a dragon. And they all talked to me and told me how to make Kung Fu. And here it is. I made it. It's amazing. All right.
Wow.
And so you're just this amazing genius. You don't have to give credit to anybody but yourself. And that's because you're a public student. You have no obligations, right? Nobody can claim you. Now, if you're a disciple, now you're my teacher, but you're my shifu, and I'm your tudi. And I'm horrible. My Kung Fu is like the worst smelling old leftover food you can imagine. It's so bad. And I go out there and I test it against somebody or I demonstrate it. And it's like everybody just wants to vomit. It's so bad. And they say, who did you learn from? You are so bad. You say, well, I learned from this guy. He's my shifu. I learned from Iftach. and
well, thank you.
Look what he taught me. It's Iftach's fault. He's so bad. He taught me this. It's not my fault, right? He's so bad. He taught me this and told me it was good. It's so bad. It's his fault. Please don't blame me. And then everybody turns to the shifu and say, oh, you're horrible. Look at the terrible student you produced. On the other hand, you're my shifu and I'm your tudi, and I go out there and I'm absolutely unbelievably good, right? And everybody's incredibly impressed. And they say, oh my God, you are so good. Who is your shifu? And I say, my shifu is Iftach, right? He's really good. So the difference is for the normal student and normal teacher, the student can go out there, be bad or be good, right? And none of it goes back to the teacher. They don't have to admit that the teacher taught them, right? They don't have to give credit to the teacher. And if they're terrible, the teacher cannot be blamed. If they are a disciple of that teacher, if they're very good, the teacher will get the credit for it. And if they're very bad, the teacher will suffer the blame.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Right. So basically, in the old days, like if I'm a teacher and you come to me and say, I want to bai shi, which means I want to become a tudi, I want to become an apprentice. Please take me as your apprentice. And I look at you, and if I think you're a complete idiot, then I will refuse you. I say, no, you're just too stupid. I am not going to teach you at all. I don't like you. Why? Because I'm worried you're not going to be very good later, and then it's going to reflect on me. If they look at you and you're strong as an ox and you're smart, they say, well, I'm going to take you because later you're going to practice hard. You're going to be really good, and then everybody's going to think I'm good. The basic premise here is the third point of important points in the Chinese language is you have guanxi, which means relationship. You have diwei, which means position, and then you have mianzi, which means face. Right? And when they talk about face, it's like they talk about face and losing face, if you've ever heard that term.
Yeah, of course.
That's a big component in the society, which basically means if you are shamed or embarrassed, then you don't have a face to show to people. You have to hide your face because you're so embarrassed. So teachers want face, meaning they want the student to make them look good. They don't want the student to make them, scared to show their face. So therefore, they try to take the people who are halfway decent or have potential to be decent and take them as disciples instead of the idiots who think they're never going to become any good. But that's the thing. So public, you don't have to give any credit back, and you don't have to give, and no blame can go back either. But private, meaning disciple, the blame can go back, and so can the credit. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, wow. And if you can continue in like the same idea, or maybe I think it's the obvious next step. You as a Westerner and that teaches in the West and studied in China, how do you see yourself as a bridge between the cultures? There's things that you said, okay, I don't want to take this, but I want to take that. How are you as an instructor, as a teacher, see yourself bringing the Gong Fu or the Chinese culture to your students or disciples? I don't know if you receive disciples, the same system. Where is the connection or the disconnection between the two cultures? Is it necessary to bring the Chinese culture to the arts, or?
Right. So the idea of, whether or not one is a bridge of cultures and how much they want to bring back, I mean, it's an interesting question, okay? Let me first say that here in the West, and probably in Israel, there's a lot of fascination with Chinese culture as being foreign and exotic, okay? It's not well understood. Most people's perception of it is full of sort of mystical, exotic bullshit, pardon me for saying, but there's a lot of bullshit. And so, many schools here would have teachers, wearing Chinese clothes and talking about Chinese ideology and mysticism and all this kind of stuff. I would say about 99% of those schools are people who don't have a really deep knowledge of Chinese culture. They're really putting on the appearance and the act and all that, sort of trying to represent the culture is usually the domain of people they themselves are fascinated by it.
It's a kind of orientalistic approach.
Exactly. It's a fascination, okay? And those who are fascinated by a culture are usually those who don't know so much about it. Because then we say they're essentially taking on the trappings of that culture, the appearances, or whatever they can grab. Or in English, the saying would be low-hanging fruit, the easiest thing to grab, right? Whatever they can put on themselves that brings them closer or makes them feel closer to that culture, they will, appropriate that aspect, okay? Because it's a fascination. Now, myself, as you know, it's like we talked about, I'm an Asian studies major. I learned a language to a functional degree. And then I learned the culture from my teacher in the US and then in China. And then I lived in China. At this point, my wife comes from Beijing. I have 2 kids that are half Chinese. And I have lived in China enough that I don't have a fascination with it. Okay? So I am not even slightly fascinated with culture. I am what we could say I am facile with the culture, meaning I know it. I don't know everything, but I know enough. And I was there enough to get bored. So wow. It's like I just was within it. And the other thing is, I can say, and this was true when I was there too, I knew a lot of people then, and I still know a fair number of people. When they go to China, they may not have the language skills, they may not have the cultural understanding. And I mean, there used to be, you'd go to China and you'd meet foreigners there, non-Chinese, who basically went to China and stayed at, the Sheraton or the Hilton, right? They'd go there and they want to have an experience in China, and they're staying at like this very expensive hotel in the Western tourist district of Beijing or whatever town they're staying in.
Yeah.
And then they go home and they had a great Chinese experience. They bought some things to bring home, but they really didn't see anything. There's a lot of people who go there even for a fairly decent length of time, but they still stay in some neighborhood like that. Since they don't know the language, they're more comfortable staying in a neighborhood where there's a lot of foreigners. And those neighborhoods that have a lot of foreigners also have a lot of, the businesses will all cater to foreigners. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of signs in English. There'll be a lot of, stores that sell things that foreigners like and where it's very convenient, Yeah.
That's very similar to my experience. I lived in Okinawa, where many American bases, reside. So
yes,
some of the soldiers or military men did try to understand the culture and where they're at, but most just stayed at base and could be 3 years in Okinawa and know nothing about it.
Right. They just hold on to the convenience.
Yep.
And so when I went to China, when I was living there, in fact, it happened that way from the very first time. And I didn't even know the first time I went to China was 1999. And I really didn't I really didn't know what I was doing at that time. I had sort of a semi-functional Chinese skill, like a year and a half of Chinese language. But I was lucky. My teacher had come from Beijing, and she taught me this. Her accent was very good, and I, like I said, I was a musician, so I had a very good ear. So I had a limited Chinese, but a very good accent, even with 1 year. But I had no other landmark. I didn't know anything about Beijing or where I was going. And so when I got off the plane, I had no idea where to go, which is quite a crazy feeling, right? To travel to the other side of the world and get off the plane in a communist country with no idea where to go. And I got off the plane and tried to find the proper bus from the airport that takes you basically into town. And I'm riding that bus, and this guy who's like sitting nearby on the bus. I was the only foreigner on the bus, and he just looks over to me and starts trying to talk to me. And of course, he's trying to speak English, right? Trying to practice his English with me. And I start speaking Chinese with them a little bit. They're very surprised that I can speak. And then, so I'm having this discussion with this guy in the bus in Chinese, and the whole bus is watching. Every single person on the bus turned around, and they're like crowding around, listening to the conversation. And the guy is asking me, where am I going? What am I doing? And I'm starting to get worried because I'm like, oh, I don't know why this guy's asking me where I'm going. Is he going to follow me home and rob? Because that happens to people. You're in a foreign country. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't tell him where I was going. I didn't even know. But even if I did, I wouldn't have told him. And he's like, do you have a place to stay? I'm like, maybe. Yes. I don't know. No. Right. And he says, look, I'm going to show you a place. I have a great place for you. And I'm thinking, all right, this guy's trying to, he wants to sell me something. He wants to take me somewhere. But where did I have to go? What did I have to lose? So I just went along with him. And he was a really friendly, nice guy. And I was kind of innocent. I said, well, what the hell? And I went along with him. He says, I know this great place. It's a small hotel. I'm going to take you there. And I know these people. It's a good hotel. And, I had this voice in my head saying, watch out. Don't go with this guy. Where are you going? But what could I do? I was, 27 or what it was. And I was like, okay, whatever. And we got off the bus in Nowheresville, as far as I could see. It was just dusty, little gray section of town. There was nothing special there. Oh. And he's like, follow me. We're going down this alley. Follow me. So I start following him down this little alley in the middle, and I'm like, oh boy, this doesn't look good at all. We went further and further down this alley, and I thought, okay, here's where they chop my head off and make a soup out of it. And that didn't happen, but he goes, here's the hotel right here. And I was like, oh my God, this guy was serious. He really has a hotel for me. So he took me to this hotel, just all this big old red building, and the hotel was called Huaqiao Fandian. Huaqiao Fandian means overseas Chinese hotel. Okay? And it turns out this was not the Sheraton. It was very small. And this hotel was a famous hotel that communist dignitaries used to stay in. So Zhou Enlai stayed there, wow. And maybe Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong. They'd all stayed there. It was like they had conferences there and stayed there. So it was like this celebrated, famous hotel, but it was really small, and it was in a tiny alley. So I went, and he's like, here, I'll get you room. He helped you get me room. He helped me get me room, and I stayed there. And the place was small. It was a really nice, beautiful old hotel, but it wasn't huge, and it wasn't the Sheraton, and it wasn't westernized at all. And that neighborhood had no foreigners whatsoever. And that was just my luck. In the very beginning, there was nobody there. So from the very beginning, I would walk out the door of that hotel, walk down the alley, get breakfast through a shop that sold like these, like vegetable and meat pancakes out of the window, right? And practice my Chinese. And that was my life there, when I was traveling. And then later, when I moved to Beijing, I got an apartment. There were no foreigners around. And then I moved closer to a neighborhood that was in my Shifu's neighborhood, my teacher's neighborhood, was right around the corner from him. And there were literally no foreigners at all to see within like 3 miles. There was nobody there. No foreigners at all. So I was in a really natively Chinese neighborhood for most of my time in China. I only spoke Chinese. I only ate the local food. I didn't stay at a big hotel. I didn't go to shopping centers. I just stayed away from the universities and the tourist stuff. So now, how did I get onto this subject? That's what I was telling you. Now I'm getting lost.
We're talking about the bridge, the cultural bridge, you as an instructor. Okay.
So, thank you. That's helpful. So, I'm tired too. I taught, 5 hours today.
Oh, wow.
So for me, living in China was really like living as a native. Now, of course, I'm not Chinese, but I had to learn a lot of stuff to be able to swim in those waters, to be always speaking Chinese, eating the local food, and talking, the friends I had were like the taxi drivers and the local people. And I just wasn't, like a foreign student who was taken care of by a university. I didn't stay in the Sheraton. I didn't hang out with foreigners. I just made my own way, and all I did was practice Kung Fu. And so the people I knew that I related to were in that Kung Fu scene, which tends to be in those days, tended to be a pretty working class scene. It wasn't like rich business people. And so, my life in China was very down to earth. I spent a lot of time with my teacher. I trained at his house. in the courtyard or in the hallway, in the elevator hallway. I had dinner at his house all the time. I went everywhere with him. I just kept to my own neighborhood, and I wasn't hanging around with foreigners. So my experiences and the fact that I used to, we always went out to dinner with me and my teacher and everything, and I was with my girlfriend's family otherwise, and being able to going out to dinner with my teacher and eating at their house. I mean, there was a lot of joking and talking and conversing in Chinese, and I was one of the very few foreigners there, if the only one at many times, and I could speak well enough to make jokes and talk about slightly more complex subjects and just sort of blend in as one of the crowd at that time. Of course, they still saw me as a foreigner, and there's sort of it's very nationalist. China's always been very nationalist, sort of xenophobic. But if you've been there long enough and you speak the language, pretty well, and you don't have any unusual demands, if you can kind of blend in where you can accept what the Chinese accept, well, then maybe you become less unusual to them and they become less unusual to you, right? I mean, I used to go out with my teacher and he's forcing me to eat all the most disgusting foods. And that was the way it was. He was my shifu. He said, eat it, I have to eat it. So, we had a lot of old stories. I mean, can I get a little bit lewd here on your podcast?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, sure.
So that was the big joke when I came back from China, and when I used to post on the internet from China, and it was like, I would write that basically, I at this point, after living in China, I finally learned how to eat dick. because he made me eat sheep dicks. We used to go out to eat, and he'd order a hot pot, be all sheep dicks.
Oh my god.
Because they eat everything, right? So you're eating the sheep dicks, you're eating the bull balls, right? Or the pig balls, or whatever it is, the testicles, right? Yeah. You're eating and then the intestine, right? And maybe you're going to eat pig brains, or maybe you're going to eat kidney or liver or chicken parts.
And how the sheep dicks project on your students here in not here in Boston,
Well, it was just a big joke,
Yeah,
and I mean, of course, my teacher, he liked to play those jokes on me too. So back in those days, you'd be out eating and drinking. Of course, they're making you drink the hard liquor, cups and cups of hard liquor. You're getting drunk, and having a big meal after a day of training, and you have a hot pot, and they dump something in the hot pot. He says, "Oh, you need to eat this. 你试试，吃吧，吃吧，吃吧. Eat this, right? Eat this. Try it. And I'm like, well, 这是什么东西？你要我吃什么东西？ What is this thing? What do you want me to eat? What is it you want me to eat? He said, 那叫辫子，你吃吧，叫辫子，辫子，你吃辫子好吃，特别好吃. So this is called. He's like, this is called 辫子. 辫子 is like saying like it's a whip. That's like a nickname for it. It's called like a whip. This is called a whip. Eat this. This is whips. It's very good. Okay. I said, okay, fine. I'm like, but what is it? He said, pienza, you have to eat it. Try it. So I eat. I'm like, oh, that's not bad. It's a little rubbery. What is it? He says, well, it's sheep dick. And then they all laugh at me, It's a big joke. Finally, you ate dick, One of my Kung Fu brothers took me to dinner at his house, and, we had a big meal, and he's like, oh, we got something special for you. This is really good. It makes you really strong. It's called Yangbao. You eat it. I'm like, Yangbao? What's Yangbao? Right? And that's a name which it doesn't have a specific, it doesn't refer to what it actually is. Yangbao, what's Yangbao? Oh, just eat it, try it, you'll like it. It's healthy, it'll make you really strong, give you energy. So I ate them. I don't know if I like that too much. Turns out, of course, that's the testicles, right? I'm like, wow, I just ate testicles, But of course, according to them, the testicles is probably like, full of life force, right? And hormones supposed to make you strong, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe make you more masculine, who knows? Yeah. But so that I lived the local situation really, and it wasn't plenty of people, they could have a similar experience, but if they don't know the language and they don't really know the cultural nuance, well, the teacher or whoever might treat them to some sort of exotic experiences, but they can't discuss it and they don't understand really what's behind it, and maybe they don't know how to go deeper into the culture in terms of cultivating guanxi, cultivating relationships, because they don't know how to give face. They don't know how to, get face, give face, create relationships. They don't know how to do that stuff. Without language and cultural nuance, you just can't do that. And when you can't, you can have a fun time and you can have a good experience, and you might even learn a bit of Kung Fu, right? But you can't go very deep. You're limited. It's like they say a glass ceiling, because the Chinese always know that you don't understand. And therefore, there's certain things they're not going to risk Certain things they're not going to talk about with you. Certain things they're not going to show you because they see you as an outsider and they fear that you will judge them, you will criticize them, and you will be offended, and they simply will not take you that deep. Mm-hmm. So my situation was that I went very deep into a family Kung Fu environment, and as a result, a lot of what other people think is fascination to me is like I usually say it like, have either of you seen the old movie The Wizard of Oz?
Yeah.
Yes. Course.
Okay, so the wizard is this amazing creature, right? And they just want to see the wizard who's going to solve all their problems, right?
Yeah.
And when they the first time they get to see the wizard, he's like, he threatens to destroy them, right? And scares the crap out of them. And then he's going to help them with their problems, but of course he scares the crap out of them. And finally, when he doesn't solve their problems, they're so mad that one of them goes and peeks behind the curtain, right? And then they see like a big machine, and there's this stupid little guy operating a machine that's making this fake projection of the wizard, right? So it's like that. So I am a guy, not the only one, but I'm one of those people who's peeked behind the curtain. I've seen behind the curtain. So in front of the curtain, you have all this history, mythology, mysticism, stories, exotic stuff, right? Visually thrilling things that we don't have in the West. Very foreign culture and customs. Mm-hmm. But if you look behind the curtain, then you see really the raw humanity of it, okay? And you'll see that, some of these things that they promote to the outside, they're not true. Some things are true, some things aren't true, or some things that you didn't understand why they were the way they are, that you can look behind the curtain and then you understand culturally why this social mechanism is operating the way it is. And once you've seen behind a lot of the curtain, I mean, you're no longer all that impressed. You're sort of like, oh, this is how that works, and this is how that works. And yeah, it's sort of, it's Earth. It's human life on Earth. It's not magical. It's not amazing. It's human life on Earth, and it's a different culture. But since I understand it and I speak the language, well, I'm not shocked, and I'm not surprised. I'm not, incredibly excited. I may like it or dislike it, whatever aspect of it, but I'm not, totally freaked out or thrilled over it. No big deal. I understand it to some degree, right? So that's where I'm at, okay? And because that's how I see things, when I came back to the U.S., when I started teaching, I did want to preserve the things that I felt were positive about my experiences, and the ones that I felt were negative, I can let them go. Or not just negative, but more like...
inappropriate. Maybe
inappropriate, or in some cases, it's like, I'm not trying to be a cultural ambassador. It's not my job to come back and teach Westerners how to be Chinese, because they're not Chinese, and they're not going to be Chinese. And I think that teaching Westerners how to be Chinese, okay, I'm going to take a break here and explain something. In my view, this is one of the ills, the sicknesses of the martial arts world in general, or at least the Chinese martial arts world, is I think a lot of students in the West come to martial arts like Taiji with the belief, the hope, and the idea that martial art is going to solve their identity problems. You have people out there who either do not know who they are, do not know where they're going, or don't like where they're going or who they are. And they want a new me. They want to create a new me or any me at all. They want an identity, okay? They feel socially powerless, they feel weak, or they feel like they're not an admirable person. They're not a person that's cool. They want other people to think they're interesting, and they don't think they're interesting. And in some cases, it's worse than that. In some cases, it's like, they didn't have a good relationship with their father, and they want somebody to replace that. And so they come looking for Kung Fu or Taiji Chuan with the idea that they want somebody, to give them an identity, right? To make them into somebody that's cool, or make them into somebody that other people will respect. And so they'll come to you as a teacher with these emotional needs, okay? And there's a lot of people in the West. It doesn't have to even be Kung Fu. It doesn't have to be Taiji. It could be anything. But if we compare it culturally to China, at least the United States, if we compare it to the society in China, Westerners are from a very young age encouraged to develop themselves individually as people, right? When we were in high school, everybody's trying so hard to be cool, right? To be like the cool guy who everybody likes. Well, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in China, but in general, in China, I mean, it is a much more collectivist society. So there's much more conformity, and it's much more of a spirit of following the group. Okay? And people are not necessarily encouraged to be individuals. They are encouraged to follow appropriately. Okay? This is not, I'm not trying to make an absolute statement, but in a general way, in the US, we're not encouraged to follow at all. We're all encouraged to look how cool I am, right? Look at me, look what I did. In China, it's like don't make noise, don't rock the boat, fit in, go along, and find your place in society. You know, it's a bit different. I know it sounds like a generalist kind of statement, but there's a truth to it. As a result, in the West, I mean, if you sort of fail at that in making yourself great as an individual, you're going to look for some way to fill that gap. And so people look to things like Taijiquan and Chinese martial arts and say, well, I can go do this, and then, look at this magical thing I'm doing. It's amazing. Now everybody's going to respect me. Look, I do this very special thing called Kung Fu, right? Or this very mystical, exotic, esoteric thing called Taijiquan. And so they come to you looking for that kind of identity, okay? You want to say something?
Yeah, if that's one, like you showed that point of showing an exotic culture, but from your talk so far, I came to understand that a lot of your easy entrance to the Chinese society was thanks to your Chinese teacher in the United States. You think, as an instructor, like if one of your students would like to go to China, part of the introduction, or like I said, an easy path to enter the Chinese culture in order to proceed their practice, you see it as a part of your responsibility, or?
So okay. I'm going to address that in a minute. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So I'll finish my thought here and then I'll address that. And
okay.
So what I'm saying is you have these people who come to you looking for identity, and the fascination with Chinese culture, the exotic fascination with it, is what attracts those kind of students who are looking for a fake identity to supplant their own that they don't feel comfortable with. All right. So if I'm selling that kind of fascination, right, that exotic idea, then those students who want an exotic identity that's very thrilling, they will be attracted. That will be great for them. Okay? Generally speaking, that exotic stuff, will you sell the culture, right? If you're a cultural ambassador, teaching people to be Chinese, making them think that they can be like Chinese, that serves the needs of those students who have this emotional need for a new identity. For me personally, I don't want to attract those kind of students, and it's like that. That's like selling something to people. It's like selling identity to people. In fact, you can't, become Chinese. You can't do any of that. You can learn the language, do the hard work, learn the culture, take the bitter of that, like Chinese people do, and then because there's bitterness just in the culture. You can learn those things, and then you can have some quality of identity, I suppose, if that's what you're looking for. So I don't feel. Not only I feel it's not my responsibility to teach people how to be Chinese, right? Or I'm not trying to teach them about China, okay? Not only is it not my responsibility, but I think if I did that, it would have a negative effect because it would lead people on to some kind of fake belief system, which I don't want to do. So what I do is I teach Kung Fu, and then I teach the cultural aspects that are related and necessary for learning Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Okay, which are a bit different.
Yeah,
now,
definitely.
Will this prepare them to go to China and learn if they want it? Yeah, it kind of would, but they still would need the language.
Yeah.
Right, but I do give them some preparation for that. But it's more that there are elements of training and elements of mind control, meaning self-control of one's own mind and your outlook on life that are uniquely Chinese, which are very much how and why something like Kung Fu even exists. So, for example, Chinese Kung Fu has particular methods and approaches towards practice, which is often done best by Chinese people because they have the mindset to take it, right? I mean, Chinese, for example, the culture can be quite harsh. It's changing now, But I mean, it used to be very strict, and parents are very strict with their kids, and it's very hierarchical and disciplinarian. And, if your parents tell you to do something, you do not argue, right? And even now, I mean, it's like if you're a young man, if you're a boy, a young man, if your mother tells you they want you to marry somebody, or let's say you're a young man, you have a girlfriend, you really like this girl, and you want to marry her, and your mother doesn't like her. They'll say, no, you can't marry her. Good luck arguing.
Wow.
So they have television shows, like reality shows in China about this subject right now.
Wow.
They have shows where people are relationship shows where they have people going on there, and this guy loves this girl, but his mother hates the girl and says he can't marry her. And then they have a big group discussion and a big reality show about, should the guy marry the girl or should he listen to his mother? It usually ends up with he listens to his mother.
Wow.
The mother gets to tell him, no, you don't get to marry that person. Parents, the authority of parents is nearly absolute. At least it was. And that's just the way the culture is. So it's like if you've grown up that way, then when it comes to your teacher or your shifu, if they tell you practice this way and take the pain, it's very common that, if I teach some Westerners, okay, the ones who aren't prepared, if I say, hey, they come to learn from me, I say, okay, do this. They say, well, it hurts too much. I can't do it. I say, yes, you can. Okay? No, I can't. It's at my limit. I can't do it. It hurts too much. I say, yes, you can, and you will. And watch this. And you force them to do it. Well, they really can do it. As a teacher of 20-something years, I know a lot better than them what they're capable of if they're a beginner student. They have no idea what they're getting into when they learn from me. But that's the truth. Most people don't. But many Westerners, if I was to say, hey, you do this and it hurts a lot, they can say, I can't take it. That's all I can do. You'd say, no, it's not. And say, yes, it is. That's all I can do. And then they're going to quit because they don't have the mental fortitude. They haven't been conditioned socially to accept authority in that way, right? I have Chinese students. If I said, do this, right? I want you to do it until you vomit. Do it until it hurts so bad you vomit. They would. They do it until they fell down. They do it until they vomit.
Wow.
They do it until they couldn't walk the next day, right? That's what old school Kung Fu training is like. But some of the Western students who aren't prepared, I'll say, do this until you vomit. They say, wow, that's abusive. I'm out of here, You're a horrible, abusive person. I'm leaving. I'm going to find somebody who's not such an asshole, And that's the truth. Now, this is another reason I'm very selective with my students. I mean, I only teach people who I think are willing to do it, right? If you're not going to listen to me, then how can I teach you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think this is no different for an art like Goju-ryu, right?
Yep.
You study Goju-ryu, right?
Yeah.
So Goju-ryu is the hard knocks art, right?
Yep.
You see them carrying those heavy vases and conditioning their arms and everything.
I did that. I do that.
Yeah, well, some of those Westerners are not going to take it. They're like, this is abusive,
Yep.
I don't think those Japanese students of the Goju-ryu teachers are arguing with their teachers and saying, but my fingers hurt. No, they're not, right? And so obviously, I have Westerners who are willing to do this, but there's also a large number that aren't. I mean, and everything within reason. I mean, I have older students too, so they don't necessarily have to take that same kind of abuse.
Of course.
Everything has to be age appropriate and related to one's
health,
bodily condition and everything. But still, it's more just about surpassing what you think are your limits. Because of course, as a beginner student of Kung Fu, you think your limits are very low. I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this. Well, the whole point of learning Kung Fu is to gain the ability to do what was formerly beyond your limits. Mm-hmm. And then later on, your skill is beyond the limits of a normal person, and that's Kung Fu. Right? So there are qualities of the Chinese culture which are necessary for that training process. Okay, so I do teach those, but I don't teach cultural fascination.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, for me too. It really makes me think about same, how I teach in my dojo, the connection to culture.
Okay, and I want if it's possible, I would like in 2 months from now, you're coming to Israel, right? In the end of
May.
And to have a seminar. I would like to ask you another question about I'm sure that you have experience in seminars. Do you have any difference the way you teach your regular students to seminars, or you have any plan or something like that?
So this is a funny thing because when you said, I'm sure you have experience in seminars. I mean, actually, my experience in seminars is very limited.
Oh, really?
I myself have never been to a seminar ever.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
Really. Like I said, I started with my first teacher, in 1995 or something like that. And I trained, 4 days a week with him for years. And then I went to China and I trained privately with his teacher. And then I trained privately in some Baguazhang. And then when I met my last teacher, I trained privately with him at home every day. I'd never been to a seminar in my life.
Wow.
I watched the seminar, the commercial seminar circuit develop into what it has become now. I certainly watched. I can't say I'm a big fan of what it has become, in Taiji anyway. It's really far too commercial for my liking, because my training was all very traditional. And mostly in seminars, you can't get traditional training. Maybe you can get a very short dose. Maybe somebody will show you a little. But most of the time, people are interested in making money and just giving you an introduction to something and taking home a bunch of money and maybe keeping you interested enough to come back for the next one. So I'd never been to a seminar. I never planned to teach any seminars. Really, over the years, my sort of public presentation of Kung Fu, I mean, I made a lot of people quite upset because I kept my own thing very, very traditional. I had walked a path which few other Americans had walked in this art, and was willing to speak openly and honestly about it. And sometimes when you do that, you're going to ruffle some feathers and disturb some, let's say, vested commercial interests, right? If there's somebody else who's making a lot of money off of something that's sort of commercial and watered down, and you start talking about the real thing in a way that doesn't reflect so great on the commercial one, you're going to make people upset, And the truth is, if you want to sell this art to the public, you have to water it down, because, I mean, it's like Gojuryu, right?
Yeah.
Gojuryu is I think the real one is very, very hard knocks.
Yeah, not many people do that.
Who wants to do that? That's right. And imagine, the way things are now with Facebook and, internet dating and everything like that. Imagine, okay, you're in Israel and you see, oh, here's a seminar on Gojuryu, right? And you talk to your girlfriend. You're like, hey, let's go to this together. I mean, you think she wants to go to that,
I wish.
I mean, you wish, right? You wish. There's not a huge number of girls who want to do that, but there's not even a huge number of guys who want to do it, right?
Not too many.
Hey, buddy, go with me to the Gojuryu seminar. Let's burn the crap out of our arms and break our legs. I mean, let's sweat and feel horrible for 2 days. Not too many people want to do that these days. So if you wanted to do a real old school Gojuryu seminar, maybe you're going to get 8 people, 5 people, who knows. But if you want to make money, if you're a traveling teacher and you want to make money, you need 30 to 50 people. How are you going to sell Gojuryu, traditional Gojuryu, to those 30 to 50 people? The first thing you're going to do is make it a lot easier, right? Because those basics are hard to teach, right? And they require a high degree of dedication, a high pain tolerance, right? And the general public doesn't want to do those things. So most seminars, especially in Taijiquan, in Chen Taijiquan, the seminars, they have to water it down. Okay? Now, in some cases, the people who are teaching the seminars only learned a watered down version because they already are the general public who learned from a seminar, and now they're teaching a seminar. Okay? But in other cases, it could be a famous teacher who knows the real thing, but isn't going to teach it to you because it wouldn't be popular in a seminar. You understand my point?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, I kept to myself. I kept to the traditional Kung Fu. I never intended to do any seminars. And then just maybe the last year, somebody in the States, in Colorado, contacted me out of nowhere and said, hey, would you be willing to come out here and teach? I said, well, why not? Sure. And I'll create a special beginning curriculum for the real thing. Rather than teach the watered down version, we're going to teach the real one. And, we'll have whatever it is, 4 days, and we're going to teach the basics. So I said, this workshop is not for everybody. This is for the people who want the real thing, and it's going to be hard, right? We call it bitter. It's going to be bitter. You're going to eat bitter, learn the real Kung Fu, the 400-year-old Kung Fu, right? The fighting Kung Fu. Doesn't mean we're going to fight right now, but we're going to learn the physical body conditioning, the stance training, and really what, in my opinion, what are the secrets to Taiji Chuan. Not the surface stuff, the mystical stuff, not the flashy, fake magic type of stuff. That's just the crap. That's what they sell you. That's like a souvenir when you're a tourist, right? It's nothing. The real magic of Taiji Chuan is the basics, right? How advanced somebody can be, how good their Kung Fu is all dependent on how good their basics are and how deep and rich their basic knowledge is. Okay? The details can only be layered on top of those basics. So the first workshop that I arrange is just, how to break down these basics in a way that people who really want to learn the magic of it, the secrets of it, can digest these pieces, right, of the basics. So we have this progression of these basics that we're going to work on. And so that's what I arranged for them. It worked very well. The people who I taught that first seminar to, a lot of them they had studied actually for many years in Taiji Chuan, in Chen Taijiquan, and were sort of dissatisfied with what they had learned. And so when I brought that out to them, it was like a revelation. It was a breath of fresh air because my teaching is very clear. It's the teaching itself is simple and clear, meaning it's easy to understand. There's a system. It's easy to understand what to train and how to do it. Whereas it's very common in Taiji Chuan for teachers to teach in a very vague way using sort of magical language. Move your chi, move your energy here, move your energy there, sync your body, make it heavier, make it lighter. How do you do these things physically? It's very, without details. You need details. You need joint alignment. Like, where do you put your bones? Where do you put your bones? Which muscles do you use? Where do you put your weight? Where is your tension? Where are you relaxed? There's many complicated things to pay attention to, but you want them to be presented to you simply in a way that you can understand. And if you have a system in front of you that's mapped out clearly, well, then you can follow those steps. And if you practice hard, you will, as they say, 出功夫, which means produce 功夫. And that's how it works. You have to have a clear map, right? That's laid out in a scientific way that produces results, right? Not mystical, magical language, not hero worship, worship of a master or any of that. Just straight technique and method. What do I practice? How do I do it? How much can I take? And you have somebody there who's going to guide you through that process. Okay, so that's what I arranged in my workshop because I was like, they want me to teach. I'm willing to teach because these people are hungry for Kung Fu. So that's my job. My responsibility, which is something I agreed to when I became disciple of my teacher, that's my responsibility to promote the real Kung Fu, okay, as I learned it. Okay, so when they bring me to teach, if they're hungry for Kung Fu, well, then that's my responsibility, and I will go. But I'm not going to teach them the fake one, and I'm not going to teach them the commercial version, right? I'm going to get paid, but they are going to work. And so this type of workshop is mainly applicable to those who want the real Kung Fu, okay? And it's very, very hard. I will just say that because I don't know who listens to this podcast who may end up at the workshop. I say this to everybody who may come to my workshops. Believe me when I say it is extremely physically challenging. Most people, when they hear that, they say, oh yeah, I know what hard is. I know what hard is. Well, they don't. Most of my students, they could have 10 years in Chen Taijiquan and they're still not going to make it through half a move. They're going to fall down red in the face and, after they won't be able to make it through one move standing. They're going to start shaking and fall down. It's very, very physically challenging. And we keep it that way. I'm keeping it pure and real, the real Kung Fu. And, people can take it as far as they want to take it. But that's what I've done is I've arranged it in a clear way so people can start their path on the real traditional Chen Taijiquan Kung Fu and have a clear way forward. So did I answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So will it be just for people who train Taiji or also for beginners or people from other arts?
So generally speaking, okay, because our particular line in Chen Taijiquan is already very different from many of the other well-known Chen Taijiquan lines, okay? Because generally speaking, the level of detail, okay? Some of the other lines, they can still be very good. Some of the heads of those lines may be very fierce. They may be very good and have a high level of kung fu. But generally speaking, our particular method is a bit more detailed. Some of the others are a bit more simplified. They might be very tough. You understand what I'm saying? They could be decent with fighting or with wrestling or whatever it is. And they might be very strong, very tough, and very effective. Yet the practice itself is more simple, less details, less clear in certain ways. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is just that this is so hard. It's so physically hard. So you put those two aspects together, and generally speaking, even if someone has a fair amount of experience in Chen Taijiquan, they're going to have to start from the beginning. If they want to learn from me, they're going to start from the beginning anyway. I have a student who came last year who has 10 years in Chen Taijiquan with 2 different teachers and is fairly accomplished. Came to train with me, started at the beginning, and believe me, it was hard. The change is hard. Even with 10 years experience, it's very hard because the method is different. We're certainly not afraid of beginners. Everybody is a beginner, and that's the point. And then there's normally, traditionally in the Chinese internal arts scene, Chinese Kung Fu scene, it's like even if you have past history with a particular teacher, if you go to learn from somebody else, those teachers, they consider themselves like a master craftsman, like a master woodworker, right? If you want to learn from them, you're learning their art. You're not learning just the art in general. You're learning their art. You're learning the art that they've put 50 years into developing. So they're going to take you from the beginning to teach you the way they want to teach you. And that's usually the way it is. When I learned from Jin Chen and when he gave me an introduction to Feng when I went to Feng I didn't ask Feng who was 73 years old at the time, I didn't say, old master, I know all this stuff already. Don't make me start from the beginning. I want to do this, and can we do that? I wasn't going to say that. He just said, do I want to learn? I said, yes. And said, okay, we started from the beginning. Do you understand what I'm saying? Even though I had, 6 years or whatever already, he didn't say, we're going to build upon what you already did. He just said, I'm going to teach you my way. And I was like, fine, I want to learn your way, right? Because that's where I'm going to learn the secrets. If you teach me all the nuance of your way, then I'm going to start to learn your language, right? Your own personal language. That's when you're going to really get the nuance from that teacher. So I can say I've started over 1, 2, 3, 4 times in Kung Fu. Each time I was completely willing to start from the beginning and let the teacher lead the show. So in my case, I've had enough years, and even though I am not the best in Kung Fu, and by Chinese standards, I'm probably just average, but that's Chinese standards. So I'm adequate. I'm average by Chinese standards. Okay, I'm not the best. I'm not amazing, but I'm good enough, and I know well enough my own level that I know my own craft is worth starting from the beginning. Right? So you can learn the whole thing. You can learn to do it the right way. I know from experience that taking this method and mixing it with another, it's like, here, I'm going to give you yellow, blue, red, purple, green, and white. And mix them all together. What color do you get?
Just
brown
right?
Or
something, yeah.
Brown, black, or nondescript, right?
Yep.
You can't really tell what color it is because they're all mixed together. Now, so what I really want is I want to give you blue and green, and I want you to mix those together. Or I'm sorry, what is it?
Blue and yellow.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My color mixing is failing here. It's failing. I'll give you red and yellow, and you're going to make orange. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you red and yellow. You're going to mix them together. You're going to get orange, which is Kung Fu, right? But too many colors, you're going to end up with a mess. So if you have your previous Taijiquan and you want to come learn this one, you think you're going to do both, you're probably going to end up with a mess. So generally, everybody starts from the beginning. But can you come from another line of Taijiquan and do this? Yeah, you can. However, generally, here's the thing. If you're doing some other line of Chen Taijiquan and then you come to do this one, it's 98% accurate that this one is much, much harder. And as a result, not only is it physically more strenuous, but it's also, the details are finer, meaning it's harder to attain the proper position in a stance or whatever, the proper alignment. The details are more exacting, more demanding. So if you have a previous Taijiquan that you're doing, you want to do that and do this. Probably what will happen is if you keep doing the other one, those sort of unclear habits you have from the other one will influence your ability to attain the accuracy in this one. Because even if you're smart enough and physically talented enough to acquire the proper positions in this training, you have to hold on to them once you acquire them. You have to retain the ability to repeat those positions over a long term. And if you have some very different body habit that you're doing, then you're sort of on one side enforcing these new habits, and then on the other side you have some competing way of moving, which is going to negatively affect your ability to solidify your habit in this art. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, perfectly.
That's normally the situation with Taijiquan. So some of the most challenging students to teach are the ones who study another line of Chen Taijiquan, and then they come to do this. And they want to keep them both. And that's like, good luck with that. That's very, very hard. I don't think you're going to be able to do that. In the long run, what usually happens is this one eats the other one. If you keep practicing them both, this one will eat the other one. If it doesn't eat it, then they'll just cancel each other out and just make a mess. You won't be able to retain this one unless it eats the other one. But students of other martial arts tend to be less challenging because they don't have something similar which competes with the body method of this one. So, for example, I have students who have a background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
Okay? And like that's an art that it has different strategies, but the body method has no competition to this at all. Because basically, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they do most of their stuff on the ground, and their body activity is sort of that of a snake or a boa constrictor, right? It's like rolling around and wrapping around you. But when they're standing up, I mean, they don't have a very well-defined base or structure of body movement that is there to compete. So they don't have to move anything out of the way to learn this. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, if I try to teach, well, look what we would do if we got thrown on the ground. You know, I recently made this video that plenty of people complained about, where I said, look, here's how some of this might happen on the ground. And if we got on the ground, well, then it might be different, right? Maybe the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would now stand in the way of adopting something if I was teaching a ground fighting thing. Do you understand? But most of Taijiquan is not going to be on the ground, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not going to have anything to stand in the way of it. Something like Goju Ryu, for example, is maybe a little more competition because it's a stand-up art for the most part. And it has a pretty well-defined and deep body method for the torso and the legs, right? And then also the method of engagement, meaning how you use your hands to either block or redirect or grab or strike, is pretty well defined in Goju Ryu.
Yeah.
And in Taijiquan it is also, but they're different. So then there's going to be a competition there. I have a student who does Goju. Oh. Right? And he does Taiji. And he's doing okay in Taiji. But then when I teach him applications for the hand, it always looks like Goju. You know, he can't not do Goju. It's hard to not do it. You know, it's very hard. So, you know, I'm not saying no. I'm saying students of other arts, I think they can do this. But it varies on a case-by-case basis. And generally speaking, you know, I hope that people who do this want to do it enough that they want to do it in the future, you know? So my hope is to open the door to people who really want to learn Chen, Taiji, and Kung Fu and want to go forward with it. Those who just, like we say in the U.S., we said like they're just tire kickers, meaning people who come to buy a new car, they go to like a car dealership, and you know those dealerships in the U.S. they always have a salesman. So you go to look at the cars, and there's some guy who sees you walk onto the lot to look at the cars. Quickly they run out of the office. Oh, here's a fresh one, right? And they go over and say, oh, can I help you? We have this one for you. This is a 2007. Here's a 2002. It's a piece of crap, but I'm not going to tell you that. It's a wonderful car. It'd be great for you. It goes with your clothing. You know, blah, blah, all this kind of stuff. They're going to sell you a car, right? Now, who does the car salesman hate the most? The person who walks onto the lot full of cars, and they say, what are you interested in today? Well, I'm looking for something that has a lot of power. Really? Okay, look at this one. This has a very strong engine. And the guy comes around, starts kicking the tires. Oh, nice tires. Oh, how about this one? I want something that's more comfortable. Oh, this is very comfortable. Starts kicking the tires. They call them a tire kicker, which means they're not there to buy anything. They just want to kick the tires and waste your time, right? You know, ideally, we don't have people who just coming in like to have a fun experience and then go home. You want to find people who are more suitable and ready to take the pain and the exertion and the sweat and do something that they really want to do. Now, does already practicing another art mean that they won't want to do it? No, it doesn't. I would think I get a lot of students who've done other arts previously, but I think in the end it's really about character, whether people are really interested in this type of an art and, whether they're suited to it.
That makes sense.
Did I answer all the questions on that one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So we'll add later exactly all the details for anyone who wants to.
Oh, for the workshop.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm sure.
I know because my student here from Israel, Ofek, is the one who's arranging it, and he's been here a few times. And he studied Chen Taijiquan in the past. He had some years behind him, I think a significant amount of years. And when he came here, of course, he couldn't get through a move either. So I think it was very, very surprising for him. And although I'm making it sound like this is the most horrible thing ever, which I'm just joking, but it is very hard. It is very strenuous. It's real martial arts training. But that's the value. You have a lot of people who are essentially selling to people a kind of a tourist version, a thrilling, exciting experience, and that's not what I'm doing. We're opening the door for the real thing here. If you ever thought about learning the real thing, well, this is it. And yeah, it's that hard. I don't know how many people have seen the the movie Drunken Master, the original Drunken Master from Jackie Chan.
Oh, I love it.
And when he goes to train with the master, and the master makes him stand like he's got spikes under his butt.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like sweating. He can't like drop. He's like holding a thing of water or something. His master's just laughing at him and smoking, right? It's a little bit like that. We won't have spikes under you, but it's like the old style kung fu that they make the movies out of. This is it. So mostly in Chen Taijiquan, you get colorful silk suits, a lot of talk, a lot of words, and some flash, a little bit of wrestling. But this is a different thing. We focus on a lot of technique, a lot of method, what they call tuisho, which is push hands, which is that sort of semi-cooperative drill training where you learn to use the opponent's force against them. We do a lot of applications. We have wrestling, grappling applications, we have striking applications, we have joint locking applications and kicking applications and sweeping applications, all this kind of stuff, which is an active part of every move that we're teaching. So it's not a performance variety, This is the practical, functional version. We do have a lot of fun. We have a lot of humor. I try to keep the group personal. We don't want to attract to that group the psychopaths, and the bullies who just want to come fight, because it's a fighting art, but we all just have to live our daily lives too. You know what I mean? We have other problems to worry about rather than just going and getting into fights with people every day. That's just not useful. But I mean, I have kids. I'm not doing that. But
yeah,
it's a fighting art, and that they also in Chinese they say it's also for a quality they call yangsheng, which means to improve your life force, right? To cultivate your health, basically. So you're cultivating your health. You're also working on your self-defense abilities. And you're also having a lot of fun because the applications and the leverage aspect of those applications it's a very interesting type of science, the way it works. Using the opponent's force against them, a lot of mind tricks that you use, how to control the opponent and to control a situation, to use softness against strength, to sort of overcome an adverse situation. It's a very interesting art. The way it works is very ingenious. So we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of humor. We try to keep it down to earth, as we say, meaning friendly and without hierarchy or superiority, and without any worship. Nobody treats me like a god. Nobody refers to me as master. It's usually a very friendly group, and we have a lot of fun. And really, anybody who really wants this kind of kung fu in their heart is going to do okay, because they can learn it at their own physical level. You know what I mean? I have students who are older, and they do what they do. Not everybody does it the same way. So even though I make it sound like it's a torture chamber, I'm really
it's the
just
good
trying
kind of torture chamber.
It is. I'm trying to scare away the people who think this is like standing yoga.
Yeah.
People come and they think, "Well, it's easy, right? It's like yoga, right?" Well, no, it's not.
I don't think they'll stay more than half an hour.
Yeah, some yoga is actually very hard, but this is harder than the hard yoga. So just try to make sure that people know what they're getting into. But generally speaking, people have a great time, and especially the people who really have been, desiring to learn the real authentic Chen Taijiquan, but never have been given the opportunity. Well, then it's a great opportunity for them.
So
Okay.
we actually have a few listeners, questions from the listeners. So
Yeah.
we talked a bit about Taiji as a fighting art. So maybe just expand a little bit more about the fighting aspect of Taiji. The specific questions, how it would do in an MMA fight or boxing fight, but I don't think that's really accurate question. It's more like a self-defense kind of art. So how do
Well, that's actually pretty astute of you to say. So it is, at least from my perspective, it is more of a self-defense art. However, the question of how would it do in MMA or boxing, it's not an invalid question, okay? It's still an applicable question, and we can kind of answer both. And so what I would say is MMA, the situation with MMA is it's a good venue for testing, people's raw fighting ability, right? However, it's still a venue that has a number of rules.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not making a criticism of those rules. I mean, any fight, any type of violence like that. I mean, it's good they have rules so people aren't dying and all that. But some of their rules are also designed to make the event last longer.
Yep.
To make it more entertaining.
Exactly.
Some rules are designed to prevent certain types of injuries that are maybe an insurance liability. Or just kind of gross, right? I mean, you don't want people plucking each other's eyes out, on stage there. But if either you or I were attacked by somebody who really wanted to do us harm, I mean, would we pluck the guy's eye out if we had the chance? Probably yes, right? I mean, we're not. If we really had to defend ourselves or our families, we wouldn't sit there and say, geez, I'm not going to do this. It's too mean, right? Or it's too gross. You're going to do whatever works. And you probably won't even be thinking at that time because, it's a stressful situation.
Yeah.
So I understand why MMA has those rules, and I'm not disputing them. However, they do have rules. And, could Taijiquan be used in MMA? Sure, it could. It's just that most people who get into Taijiquan don't want to. And there's a number of reasons for that. So some of them being that, really if we look at MMA, it has a history of people with a lot of steroid use as well. If you want to compete in MMA, you have to go through a lot of body, what would it be? Sort of body contortions. I mean, some people are using steroids and then other people are doing all that weight cut,
Yeah.
Basically, it's a competition sport that has a lot of money on the line. And I think a lot of people, they really sacrifice their health to succeed. So the weight cut business, that's not good for you at all. That's terrible for your health, right? And then the steroid use, that's horrible for your health. And then getting hit in the head, that's terrible for your health too. Okay? It is, right? I mean, we know all this stuff now is coming out about brain injury, even on a minor scale. So the people who want to participate in MMA are people who want the pride and the money from succeeding. And they're not too concerned about their health. It just happens that people who get into arts like Taijiquan tend to be more concerned with their health. Okay? And so I don't think they want to go bashing themselves around in MMA. It just doesn't seem to be popular with that crowd. Now, keep in mind that my own exposure to people who want to learn Taiji is very small, meaning I don't teach to really large groups. So the people who come to learn from me tend to be maybe a little more serious. They take more pain than other people. But they still don't want to get their heads beaten to the ground. I'm not talking even about the just general sort of health and yoga crowd. I'm talking about even the martial arts crowd in Taiji. They tend to be more interested. Taiji is like very interesting, and it has good fighting methods, but still, it's not really conducive to the competitive impact arts, the competitive fight sports. Because it does have another side to it besides the fighting side, which is very concerned with energy cultivation and increasing the health level of your body in general. I'm not saying that training those other arts is also not healthy. I mean, it probably is healthy. There's plenty of arts that are healthy. In MMA, how would it function? That is dependent on the rules, right? Taijiquan, for example, Chen Taijiquan has a very good stand-up grappling game, okay? So they have a very good stance. It's very stable, and generally speaking, there's a lot of emphasis on learning to control the opponent's balance, learning to break the opponent's structure, right? And a lot of throwing that relates to that. So a lot of what we've seen in MMA was often very dominated by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, And, you'd have a lot of fights where you'd have strikers or people who are good at striking or kicking, whatever it was, who could still be dominated by someone like Royce Gracie, who would just, run in and wrap around them like a snake. And maybe he's going to take some beatings while he's doing that. But if he can just get in there, once he's wrapped him, somehow he'll get him onto the ground, and that's it. He's a boa constrictor. Now he's inside their range. Striking is not too effective when somebody's all wrapped around you, and then they know the ground game and they win on the ground. Okay, Taiji in this context, at least one aspect of it is that someone who's really good at Chen Taijiquan, it's not that easy to take them down. So, and this is true of some other arts as well, but this is just one of the emphasis. So Taiji has a very strong base, decent footwork if the person's really good, and a good knowledge of how to manipulate the opponent in that situation. So now, these days, being a skilled striker in Chen Taijiquan is very, very rare. Some of that, it's just a lost art, okay? Now, some of it still exists, but to find somebody who's really accomplished at it, good luck with that. It's very hard. Now, I teach a lot of that, but I'm also not a competitive fighter, but I teach the methods, okay? I have a lot of those tools. I'll teach the methods. If somebody else wanted to go be a fighter with it, great, go knock your brains out. But that's not for me, okay? But the point is that the traditional version has a well-developed striking art with a lot of detailed different hand methods, fist methods, elbow methods, and then, kicking and all that, and then there's joint locking and all that kind of stuff. But they have a well-developed striking arsenal and delivery vehicle. And then they have a good base that's stable, that's designed to break and manipulate the opponent's structure. When you put those two things together, okay, that's something that could function in mixed martial arts to a point. You can use that striking method if you trained it as a competitive fighter. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I could teach the tools, but even myself, I'm not in there training it day in, day out about, how to go toe-to-toe with somebody in a striking match. I'd have to take that and train it to a competitive level where that was all I did, right? That's what boxers do. So for a professional boxer, all they're doing is hitting, punching. And so they know the ins and outs of all those angles and the timing and all that. Not only knowing the angles and timing, they also know the tools, which are, the jab, the cross, the uppercut. They have these tools. You can learn these tools, and then you got to put them into real time and train them in action. Well, Taijiquan, we have all these different tools. They're not the same as boxing, okay? And if you wanted to train them in real time, you'd have to do that. It's not enough to just know the tools, okay? But even learning the tools these days is nearly impossible because they're almost a lost art. Most people focus on performance and wrestling, okay? And even the wrestling that they focus on in the commercial area is not traditional Taijiquan wrestling for the most part, okay? Most of it comes from judo or senda, okay? So it has a good striking element, and it has this base, this mobile base, and this way of manipulating the opponent. So in mixed martial arts, if they were to fight in that situation, if they were to train it at the level of competitive fighter, they can go toe-to-toe with a boxer and use their striking method, and if the grappler comes in, then they can use their base and their throwing. I know from having students in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not interested in standing up. Yeah. Their goal is to get you to the ground, and they're going to go with you. Taijiquan has a pretty well-developed throwing method, right, and a stand-up grappling method. But when Taijiquan, when they throw somebody to the ground, they don't go with you. Now, many people who don't understand the art will say, if you throw me to the ground, I'm going to take you with me. The difference is Taijiquan throwing of the traditional variety usually employs striking and locking and specific leg techniques so that when they throw you, it's not the same as a judo throw. So most judo throwing, this is why judo and aikido, they focus very much on those break falls, like rolling and break falls, right? And they use mats. So they use mats, they roll, they break fall, okay? For Taijiquan that I know, many of the falls don't allow for any roll or break fall. So when you're falling, your opponent's leg is in the way, they're locking your joint, and you're falling in a way that you don't have a hand to reach even to the ground because it's locked up. That's the traditional art, is they're kind of trying to break your joint while they're throwing you. And so you can't roll out of it because when you hit the ground, they're still controlling one of your joints. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we have a few of those.
Yeah, I know they have those in Aikido. They do have some, but the majority of judo stuff is like lets you roll or slap, right?
Yeah, but that's because it's more competitive. Like it's built to be competitive.
Right. So they've sort of removed some of the teeth from the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Tai Chi Chuan, the traditional variety, it's all teeth. You know, when you take a throw, you can't roll. Your face smashes on the ground, or you hit the back of your head. You know, or they sweep the foot out of under you and put you flat on your back. Things like that. So you know, that's one way that. Like, because I've had to deal with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu students, and so I usually approach it like, you know, we use Tai Chi Chuan throwing. Now, if they took me to the ground, they might be a lot better than me on the ground, right? So I'm going to try not to go there. You know, I have a few things I can use on the ground, but generally speaking, that's all they do is the ground stuff. So when you swim in the alligator pool, if you're not an alligator, you're probably in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it also comes from the word. If we talk about Tai Chi Chuan, you talk about fists. It's more boxing oriented, probably.
Well, I don't know about that. I think that word Chuan in Chinese really refers to fist system. Okay. But there is some truth to that. But for the real answer, I think we have to go back further and realize that, you know, these arts came out of, you know, these are 1,000-year-old arts here. And so back at that time in China, they really are self-defense arts. So if I throw you to the ground, if you end up on your back on the ground, someone's going to pull out a sword and cut your head off. You're not going to be doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You're just going to die. Or if I throw you down on the ground, my friends are going to stomp on your head, right? So it's not that I throw you to the ground and you take me with you. It's I throw you to the ground. It doesn't matter. If you're down there and somebody doesn't like you, you're going to get killed, you know? Or worse, you know, the other part is in Chinese society, there's this idea of like being dirty is kind of unacceptable. Like they sort of look down on peasants, farmers, because they're dirty. So the idea that you went down and fought on the ground sort of means you have no class. So it's sort of like I threw you to the ground and now you want to fight because you got to keep in mind there's shit on the ground. There's dog shit, there's pig shit, there's cow shit, and there's people shit. This is like the Middle Ages here, 400 years ago or whatever. There's shit on the ground. It's a farming village. There's horse shit, you know? So if I throw you in the shit, you think you're going to pull me to fight in the shit with you? You know? It's sort of like people in society were concerned with having face and having a little bit of class, and they don't want to get on the ground and fight. So generally speaking, I think that's a part of it too. It's sort of like, no, we don't fight on the ground. Once you're down, you're done, you know? Now, maybe they get on top of you and beat the crap out of you. Maybe they do. But I guess the point is it's somewhere between being on the ground, not being dirty, and the other side being on the ground, being very unsafe because everybody has small knives and all that kind of stuff. So I just think that wasn't a priority for them, you know, to try and choke somebody out on the ground because, you know, you're choking them and they pull out that little knife and just remove your testicles and they're in the hot pot the next day. You know? So
that's a full circle.
You know, yeah. So I think that's just, you know, it's not a big concern for them. And even today, in terms of self-defense, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a very effective art for the sport arena. But in terms of self-defense, I mean, most self-defense encounters don't happen with just one guy on one guy. They're usually going to happen maybe one guy on one guy, but the other guy's friends are there. And if you end up on the ground, you think they're honorable enough not to start stomping on you when you're on the ground?
Yeah, well.
You know what I mean? It's that sort of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu also relies on sort of an honor system, that it's just me against you and nobody else is going to get involved. But in real life self-defense, it's like, you know, if I end up on the ground, I'm worried that the guy's friends are going to get in and beat me to death, right? Or maybe I get on the ground. Maybe I'm fighting somebody who really is a bad guy and, you know, I'm fighting for my life and I get on the ground. If I'm trying to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he could be choking, you know, I can be choking him out and he can pull a knife out of his pocket and just slice me right at the leg and I will bleed to death, right? Because you can't trap every part of a person's body all at once and they could reach into their pocket, pull out that blade and you're dead, you know? So for self-defense, being on the ground, rolling around with somebody is maybe not so smart, you know? So Tai Chi Chuan originally really is a self-defense art. Could it function in mixed martial arts? Yes, to a point. But then when you talk about the striking art, Tai Chi Chuan also has a lot of, it works upon contact. If you're striking me, Tai Chi Chuan doesn't have blocking, okay? We don't have any hard blocks. They use redirect. So if you're punching me, I may try to join. I mean, I want some contact. I want to touch you when you're striking. Join and redirect your attack, right? So maybe brush it off to a slightly different angle, control it, go with it, pull it, whatever it is, or move in against it. But I've got some contact, even a temporary, minor, little bit of contact. And I'll probably try to keep that contact. Or maybe I don't keep that contact, but that contact gives me a location on a map for how to plan my next move according to angles of where your limbs are. Okay, and one of the things that makes something like Taijiquan hard to use in a mixed martial art format is that any kind of gloves you put on get in the way of your hand abilities. Okay, so Taijiquan is kind of designed that if you get contact, you're going to try and keep contact, or maybe you have unwanted contact where they're mashing your hand, and you're going to turn that contact into a joint lock. And then from that joint lock, you might stress that joint out, control it, then yank on it while you're hitting them, right? It's a hard thing to do when you have gloves, for boxing specifically. Those boxing gloves are too big for most of the Taijiquan hand method. The mixed martial arts gloves are smaller, they're more applicable, but then, they don't allow the elbows, they don't allow the small joint manipulation, and a lot of the things which is like, well, for a self-defense person, you would definitely want to use those tools. Mm-hmm. So I would say generally, in terms of boxing, it's hard to really deal with boxing because those gloves really mess up your game. Yeah. Because you're looking for smaller spaces than those gloves can fit through. You're also looking to be able to grab and control, and you can't do that with those gloves. But if you're going against a boxer, you're not going to want to just go toe-to-toe on a striking game with them, right? If a boxer's, a really good boxer can defeat most people, right? Those boxers are incredibly good. When they're good, I don't care whatever other kind of martial artist you are, you go against a boxer like that, they're going to kick your ass with just boxing, right? If you throw something at them that they're completely unfamiliar with, well, that might change the situation. So generally, for a boxer, if you throw a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy against a boxer, well, the boxer is going to have some trouble, right? So for Taijiquan, maybe you don't want to put those gloves on, but if you go against a boxer, again, if he's way better than you, you're still going to be in trouble. But if you're good at your game and he's good at his game, maybe you get in and use Taijiquan grappling, right? And joint lock, and you break his elbow when he's striking, right? Or you trip him, sweep his foot, and that's not a situation that he's comfortable with because he's a boxer. For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they like the ground grappling, but, they might not be so great at the stand-up grappling, or they might not be so great at the striking. So Taijiquan is really one of the early mixed martial arts. That's really what it is. It's called a mixed martial art, essentially. It's back in the day, they put together the striking, the kicking, the locking, and the throwing. Right? Striking, kicking, locking, throwing. Is that it? Is that all of it?
Yeah, grappling.
Yeah, grappling they consider throwing. Okay.
Yeah.
So it really combines all those elements. So it is an old mixed martial art, but it's really not designed for rules. Now, of course, we have many drills that do follow rules, such as Tuisho, what they call push hands. It has a set of rules, and you're not hitting your opponent. You're learning to manipulate your opponent's force. And use certain powers that you've developed, strengths and powers, and joint lock and redirect their actions and within a framework of patterned movement, right? So use these patterns of movement and see who prevails. See what you can use within those patterns. And then they have similar Tuisho practices that don't have pattern, that are just free play. And then you're grappling, or maybe you're striking, or
the kind of pushing. Sparring.
Yeah, it's sort of like sparring, but not striking sparring, right? It's like pushing, moving, grappling, locking, those kind of things. You want to do striking sparring, you could put on the light gloves and do that too. Why not? But people are going to get hurt. That's how that goes. Yeah. We try to limit the injuries and the dental repairs.
Yeah.
Did I answer enough?
Yeah. Great answer. I think we have a lot of material for
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much.
So much. It's really an amazing interview. Really, really interesting.